Welcome to the Sherdog Radio Network preview for UFC Fight Night 222, Pavlovich versus Blaydes, also known as UFC Vegas 71. I'm your host, Ben Duffy of Sherdog.com. With me, as always, is Keith Schillen, the executive producer of the Sherdog Radio Network. Keith, how are you doing today?
Already off to a great start. I'm doing great, man. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. We're as we often are these days, less than 24 hours removed from discussing UFC Kansas City. And in looking at this card, there are certain parallels for me in that the main event is about as good as it gets for a free fight night card. Just, a couple of legit top 10 contenders who are within shouting distance of a title shot if they win. And then down the card, it's very much a mixed bag. There are a couple spots of interest, a couple of prospects who, for being undefeated, are kind of flying under the radar in a way that undefeated prospects usually aren't. And then there's some, oh, really? Are they still in the UFC? A couple of those type fights. What's your overall take on this one?
I like this one. Obviously I'm grading on a curve for a fight night. Yeah. I'm going like a B+. I think it's really strong. If I had Bo Nickal on it, I'd give it an A. That's of course that's the thing it's missing.
If it had Bo Nickal on it, you'd be like trying to send the UFC like $75, even though it was a free fight night card.
That's right.
Like, this can't be free. What's the catch, guys?
The main event is obviously, the winner of that match would probably get your next title shot. That's assuming that Jones and Miocic gets done, and they take on the winner of that. The co-main event is banging. There's like you mentioned, there's some good fighters on up and coming that I like. Some action fights where the guys aren't that highly ranked, but I think will be really fun fights. Overall, I think it's a good fight night card.
Yeah, I completely agree here. It is also a heaping helping. It's 14 fights. So unless you've got any other general thoughts on this one, let's jump right in.
No, not a lot of story time with Keith. We got to press through on this one.
We jump right into the men's bantamweight division for a matchup between Brady Hiestand and Batgerel Danaa. Hiestand, the 23-year-old Washington State native, is 6-2 overall. He is 1-1 since joining the UFC as the runner-up of the 29th season of The Ultimate Fighter. He fought first in August of 2021 at UFC on ESPN Barboza versus Chikadze, which was the de facto TUF 29 finale, where he dropped a split decision to Ricky Tercios. He came back over a year later, last November, and took a unanimous decision over Fernie Garcia to even up his UFC mark. He will look to go over 500 against Danaa, who is looking to do the exact same. The 33-year-old Mongolian is 12-4 overall. He is an even 3-3 in the UFC. Was on a good run there, but has lost back-to-back fights. He fought last March and got knocked out in the second round by Chris Gutierrez, got laid out by a spinning back fist, came back last June at UFC 275 and dropped a unanimous decision to Cheick Kongo. Odds here actually favored Danaa nonetheless. He is minus 155. Hiestand plus 125 as the slight to moderate underdog. Keith, it sounds like the bettors have the same problem I do, and that's a problem giving Brady Hiestand enough respect. You've kind of defended him to me the two times that we've previewed his fights. The TUF finale and then the fight with Garcia. I'm starting to come around on him. And part of it is that he's so young, and he does seem to be making measurable improvements from fight to fight. Give me your thoughts on this one, and let me know if you still are somewhat bullish on his upside.
Yeah, I think this is a good fight to start the card. I think that's one of those fights we talked about where we said, not the highest ranked guys, but it's an action fight, and I think this is the case. Danaa is a guy that, he's been around for a little bit. I kind of know him a little bit more than Hiestand. He's a good athlete. He's explosive. He's got, strong striker, some quick hands. He does well to kind of bounce in and out of range and land some hard shots before getting out and getting hit. And his right hand down the pipe is a smoking piston. I like that DC pointed out in one of his fights that he's constantly trying to win the foot battle, which is really important for a power puncher. He's got 3 wins by KO in the UFC. I love his high kick. He really has a good kicking game really everywhere. He's a weak defensive wrestler, and he gave up 3 takedowns to Alatang Haley, which is not a good sign. Now, Hiestand, as you mentioned, he's really young. He's aggressive on the feet. A bit of like a pocket boxer where he gets inside. He wants to brawl it out a little bit. I'd say plus power, and he's starting to come into those power years, so you might increase his power. Throws a lot of kicks. He likes that like dipping Robert Whittaker high kick where you dip to one side and throw the high kick on the other side. I love that he throws stepping knees. I am concerned that he was dropped by Fernie Garcia, and Danaa is a harder hitter than Fernie Garcia, so that's troublesome. He can wrestle. He's a good wrestler. I love his reactionary double. I like that he drops on his opponent's hips when they're trying to like counter strike him. This is effective, though he can also shoot without a setup, without his strike. So that's a little concerning. Hopefully that's something he can kind of clean up. Strong top game. I mean, he kept Vince Murdoch on the mat for a long time. Murdoch's a good grappler himself. Good ground and pound. One thing on the show I didn't like is he gassed out a little bit against Josh Reddinghouse, but we haven't seen that since. I do think Batgerel has the advantage on the feet just from the pure punching power, while Hiestand probably has the advantage on the ground. I'm going to go right out the gate and go with an upset. I think Hiestand, at his age, I think he can make improvements on the feet. I also think he's going to win the wrestling, get a few takedowns. I'm going to say I'm going to lean slightly to him. So give me him by decision.
Yeah, I like the breakdown. I like the upset pick there too. Hiestand's offensive wrestling against Danaa's sometimes problematic defensive wrestling is definitely one of the things that this fight could hinge on. I also like you pointed out the gas tank problem on the show that we haven't really seen since, even though both of his fights since then have gone the distance. Both have been pretty high paced. I mean, his fight with Ricky Tercios was wild. Whenever that happens, it always makes me wonder if it is part of just, I mean, these guys have to make weight 3 times in 6 weeks sometimes. And when you contrast that to in your normal career, you're working towards working 12 weeks towards peaking once. Like it can sometimes be a problem. So
and you're cutting weight with different coaches, not the guys that does it the way you like, So I think that's a good point. Yeah,
and coaches that sometimes don't give a shit about you. Not saying that was the case on that particular season. Just like tough is it's a weird experience, I'm sure, for those fighters. Anyway, I can absolutely see Hiestand taking Danaa down in 2 rounds out of 3, and winning the fight that way. I'm going to stick with the favorite here. Just, I think Hiestand is still improving. I think if they have this fight again, or if this fight were taking place a year from now, 18 months from now, I might feel differently about it. But I like the diversity of Danaa's striking. I like his power. Yeah, give me Danaa to stay upright enough to win this fight. Maybe sting Hiestand a few times, but should be a real fun one to open up this card. I'll take Danaa by decision. Next up, we head to the women's flyweight division for a matchup between Priscila Cachoeira and Karine Silva. Cachoeira, the 34-year-old Brazilian, is 12-4 overall. She's 4-4 since joining the UFC just a couple of years ago. After a pretty inauspicious start, she was drafted, of course, to welcome Valentina Shevchenko to her new division, and Cachoeira ended up losing that fight badly, of course, and then losing her next 2 as well. She has turned things around and has won 4 of 5 and has won her last 2. She fought twice last year. She beat Ji Yeon Kim by unanimous decision in February. She came back in August and knocked out Ariane Lipski in just 1 minute and 5 seconds. That was at UFC on ESPN, Vera versus Cruz. So Cachoeira will look to make it 3 in a row, look to bring herself above 500 in the octagon, and opposing her in that pursuit will be Silva. The 29-year-old Brazilian is 15-4 overall. She is 1-0 in the UFC since joining out of the 2021 season of Dana White's Contender Series. She debuted last June at UFC Fight Night Volkov versus Rosenstrike, where she choked out Poliana Botelho in the closing seconds of the opening round. Odds here favor Silva pretty comfortably. She's minus 190, Cachoeira plus 155. Keith, I got to say, my biggest kind of question mark about this is, I mean, we saw Karine Silva choke out Poliana Botelho in her UFC debut. And while her record, you look at her record on paper and she has more KOs and TKOs than submissions, the KOs were all pretty early in her career in regional Brazilian shows. In her higher level and more recent fights, she's been getting more submissions. My question is whether Priscila Cachoeira will gouge her eyes and get disqualified if she's in a choke, or will simply gouge her eyes and then just get choked out. We must always point out that win or lose, Priscila Cachoeira should not be in the UFC right now. She's 4-1 in her last 5, but in that one loss, she laid 2 of the most blatant eye gouges on Jillian Robertson that we've seen in the UFC since the 90s, since like the old no holds barred, like single digit UFC days. Like, it was absolutely terrible. But I do like Silva in this one. Cachoeira, she's survived that early bad run in the UFC, and she's discovered her power. I mean, whenever there's a bad fighter in one of these fights, I always say, okay, what is one thing they do at a UFC level? She's one of the hardest punchers in the women's flyweight division. Not a whole lot of technique behind it, to my mind. I mean, just it's very Vanderlei Silva-esque. I'm going to wade forward with hooks and often with my chin kind of in the air and just trust my power and my chin to carry me through. It's worked against the Shayna Dobsons, Gina Mazzanis of the world. It worked on Ariane Lipski, boo. But she's still vulnerable to be taken down. She's still vulnerable to being countered by fighters with decent head movement, better footwork. She's just kind of swept out a swath of lower level flyweights in the UFC. I don't know how high I am on Karine Silva, but I do like her better than Dobson, Mazzani, Kim. So give me Silva here to probably survive the mad woman onslaught of Priscila Cachoeira. Cachoeira also can punch herself out and gas out a little bit. I like Silva here to survive the early onslaught, maybe even give her something back on the feet she doesn't like. Like, Silva is a big flyweight and a pretty good hitter herself, but I expect Silva will take Cachoeira down maybe in the second round and go to work from there. Give me Silva by second round submission, and all I'm hoping is we don't have any egregious fouls.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about the fouls again, but I mean, that said, she's on a run. So Cachoeira, she's a very aggressive striker now, just marching down on foes. Though I do have to point out that she needs to learn how to cut off the cage a little bit more. But when she gets in the pocket, she's a violent brawler. She throws hard shots. You mentioned the winging shots, kind of just ducking throws. She showed the power again. She blasted Shayna Dobson. You mentioned Gina Mazzani. You mentioned Ariane Lipski. Despite the power, the technique is really bad. I mean, she has a lot of defensive holes. I mean, she drops her hands, leaving herself open to counters. She also keeps her hands very wide, so there's besides chin high, it's just this wide target. Go to the body, go to the face. Teep kicks up the middle, anything like that. She keeps her chin high in the air to get countered. She can wrestle a little bit. I wouldn't call her a wrestler. She's definitely more like a topside grappler, though she did get smoked on the ground by Jillian Robinson. One thing about Cachoeira, she's tough though. Like she took a beating from Valentina Shevchenko and didn't quit, so I'll give her that. Now, Silva, I agree with what you said. She's well-rounded. She's a boxer with some quick hands. She attacks with a lot of combinations. She throws straight punches down the pipe. She likes teep kicks. She's got a pretty fast high kick. I'd say she's an okay wrestler, but her entries are okay, but she chains together takedowns, which I really like. And she's a good, like, overall just jiu-jitsu grappler, good back takes. She's got 5 subs on her record, subs off her back. She almost got a Gogo Plata on the Contender Series. The only concern is she does struggle to get up. Cachoeira is hot right now, winning by just brute force than technique. But Silva can also fight that way, and I think she's as a brute, not like wing and web. I mean, like, physically strong woman, and I think she's a more technically sound fighter. I think she gets the better of the exchanges on the feet, and I think that'll eventually set up a takedown for her. And I think she's going to get a submission too. You said second round submission. I'll go first round then.
Next up at UFC Vegas 71, we have a featherweight matchup between Francis Marshall and William Gomis. Marshall, the 24-year-old New Jersey native, is a perfect 7-0 in his mixed martial arts career. He's 1-0 in the UFC since joining out of the 2022 season of Dana White's Contender Series. He debuted back in December at UFC on ESPN Thompson versus Holland, knocking out Marcelo Rojo in the second round. He will look to make it 2 straight in the octagon and look to keep his professional record spotless against Gomis. The 25-year-old Frenchman is 11-2 overall. He also was 1-0 in the UFC. He debuted last September at UFC Fight Night, Gane versus Tuivasa. That, of course, would be UFC Paris, where he took a majority decision over Jarno Aarons. So 2 gentlemen looking to advance themselves as some of the more intriguing young prospects in the featherweight division. Marshall is a strong favorite to get it done. He is minus 215, Gomis plus 170 as the underdog. Keith, featherweight division has for quite a while now been one of the stronger divisions in the UFC, sure. One of the harder ones to work your way up to a title shot, one of the harder ones to break into the top 15, but not a whole lot of 25 and under prospects have kind of broken through in the last year or two. These 2 guys, look like they might be some of the future of this division. Who do you like in this one right now? And if you see substantially more upside for one or the other of these guys in the long term, who is it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Right now, I'll get to that answer in a second. Overall, I'd probably go with Gomis, I always say it, Gomis. Being from France and a smaller market in obviously MMA, not in the world, but smaller market MMA, just kind of rising market. So I think the potential is there a lot more than just another American fighter. As far as right now, like I didn't mean that as a diss to Francis Marshall. I kind of like Marshall. I don't know, he's a high volume striker, pressure striker. He definitely wants to be the one pressing the action instead of being pressed back. I'd say he's a serviceable boxer. Throws straight shots down the pipe. His straight right is his best shot. Nice zip on his shots. He hits hard. I mean, we saw that in his last fight against Marcelo Rojo. He does stand a little tall for my liking, keep his chin too high. He's got a good kicking game. He hard calf kicks, though he doesn't check kicks. Good wrestler, fast entries. He will shoot a little too far away without a setup, which I don't like. But if he gets the fight to the ground, he advances position, good back takes. He is a submission threat, and he's shown that he has ability to fight at that like a hard pace for the entire fight. Now, Gomis is a southpaw kickboxer, very fast hands. Though I don't like how he keeps his hands really low. He can have low output. He was like his last fight, he was sitting back, waiting to kind of counter. Good power, throws a lot of kicks. He likes spinning attacks. He will wrestle a little bit, more of a reactionary double, and that's what actually we saw in his last fight. He won a lot because of his takedown, but I definitely wouldn't call him a wrestler. When he gets the fight on top, like in his last fight, he was stalling for big portions of that fight. And he needs to improve his top game in the fact of, being more of a submission threat, being more ground and pound, punishing his opponent. And despite winning the fight, he almost got submitted right at the end. So I think both guys are pretty promising. I think Gomis might even be more polished, but I'm going to go with Marshall on this. I like his pressure. I think he's going to smother Gomis. I think he's going to crowd the kicker, get inside on him. I think he's going to be the better wrestler, actually win the wrestling exchanges. Give me Marshall by decision.
As you were breaking down Gomis's kind of skills and approach there, I'm like, okay, so you're describing this like ripped black French guy who's got fast hands, but sometimes doesn't throw enough volume, is surprisingly good wrestler, but you wouldn't call him a wrestler. I'm like, this is Cheick Kongo, isn't it? Like,
way younger. Yeah. Cheick Kongo like 50 years old.
If it were time for story time, like we're not even sure how old he is. Like there's legit question that he might be 4 or 5 years older than he says he is.
I'll give you one quick story. This is
please,
a very quick story. So I'm interviewing Cheick Kongo at one of the Bellator events at Mohegan Sun, and it was one of these ones where they had like a bunch of fighters at different spots, and you kind of stand there and I kind of worked around. I got to. He's not a good interview. Like just it is. It's his interviews are just like his fights. Like long, drawn out, but whatever. I'm just trying to get Sherdog as much content as I can. So I'm interviewing him, and he has this really long thing about his wrestling. While I'm doing this, a guy just sets up right next to me and just jumps right into my interview. Just asking questions, but he has the same exact questions I just asked. And then he goes on the same big, long, drawn-out answer that he just gave me right in the middle of my interview. So there you go. This is my Cheick Kongo story.
I mean, it's probably like his first time there, and he's never been to one of those car wash type ones where you go around to the stations. And you just thought
you just set up.
He's like you're in like the museum or something. Like he just walks up to the exhibit next to you.
Yeah, it is best that he just asks the same exact question.
Poor Cheick. Cheick on the inside is like, hey, I'm bored too, guys.
Oh, you know what's the funny thing? Oh, then he does this. It was when he won a fight and he called for the Ryan Bader. And this is the other thing he did. I'm not a Cheick Kongo fan. Like, I don't dislike the guy, but Cheick Kongo doesn't have a lot of fans. And he starts doing, and he goes, guys, I'm not here to talk. I just want to say like fuck Ryan Bader. I want to fight him. I'm done with talking. Points directly at me. He goes, "You're cool, but I don't want to talk to you guys." But there's like 20 of us. He just points direct just at me. Like, "You're cool." Really? I think did I get sandwich? I didn't realize we were homies.
How was that not how I introduce you? Like every time we do one of these shows,
you gotta find with
me as always is the only guy Cheick Kongo thinks is cool.
You gotta find the he did that like F you, you're cool, F you, and I'm out. You gotta find that old interview I did where he points at me and just says, "You're cool."
My goodness. That was definitely worth it. I agree with everything you said about Gomis. I can tell that for as long as he hangs around in top level promotions, and I mean, he'd fought in like Cage Warriors and UAE and stuff. I mean, I'd seen him fight a few times before I had to scout him for the UFC. He's going to be frustrating. And part of it might be that I suspect he has a substantial weight cut to make it to 145. He is big for the division. Tall, rangy, but also he's not a narrow shouldered guy. He's got some muscle on his frame. He's going to be visibly, I think, much larger than Francis Marshall, who's not small himself. And that might be part of it. He might just have that self-imposed pace that comes from not trusting your gas tank. But yeah, I'm with you as well. I was surprised that Marshall was over a 2-1 favorite, but I favor him as well in this one. He's super young. He's improving from fight to fight. I mean, he looked better even just from his appearance on the Contender Series to his debut in the UFC. And Marcelo Rojo, I thought of as kind of a tough, grizzled veteran, solid first test, and I thought Marshall handled him well. I think he's more likely to have made substantial improvements between his last fight and this fight. And I'm with you here. Give me Marshall by decision, and hopefully it's a fun fight. Hopefully he pulls a little bit of a firefight out of Gomis, or we get to see a little more of his groundwork. We head now to the heavyweight division for the first of two heavyweight bouts on the night, as it is Mohammed Usman versus the debuting Junior Tafa. Usman, the 34-year-old, of course, the younger brother of former UFC welterweight champ Kamaru Usman, is 8-2 overall. He is 1-0 since joining the UFC as the heavyweight winner of The Ultimate Fighter Season 30. He appeared in that tough final, which was on UFC on ESPN, Santos versus Hill last August, knocking out Zach Pauga early in the second round. Sort of redeeming himself as a formerly busted prospect after, being signed to Professional Fighters League as a fairly touted heavyweight up-and-comer and getting choked out by Brandon Sales in his very first appearance with the promotion, never fighting for them again. So a bit of a redemption story there. He'll look to see if he can keep it going against Tafa. The 26-year-old Australian is just 4-0 as a professional mixed martial artist. He does have a kickboxing background, but he fought most recently on New Year's Eve on the Bellator versus Rizin card, where he took on a fighter that Rizin wants to put forward, Tsuyoshi Kamiyama, also known as Tsuyoshi Sudario, the sumo convert, and he was brought in as a setup opponent for Tsuyoshi Sudario and plunked him in about 90 seconds. That was good enough to get him signed by the UFC, and he makes his debut here, and this fight is a dead pick'em, the first of several on this card. Both gentlemen minus 110. Keith, I'm happy that Mohammed Usman is in the UFC. I'm happy that he got a feel-good story. I'm sure it doesn't feel good to be like the fail brother of somebody that at the time he washed out of PFL was probably the top pound for pound fighter on the planet. Having said that, I don't know that Mohammed Usman is that different from the guy who got choked out by Brandon Sales. And that was an embarrassing loss. Brandon Sales was a 40-year-old part-time fighter and never that great a fighter at any point in his development. And Usman gassed out horribly, which is never a good sign for like a 235-pound heavyweight, especially if you're going to name yourself the Motor. You damn well better have one. I will admit to kind of snickering at that performance. And against Pauga, he had a little more left in the second round and punched him out. And obviously, Usman does have massive punching power. But on the way up, as he sort of mopped people up in low-level regional promotions, it was a lot of it ran off of his wrestling. He was a strong, nimble guy for a smallish heavyweight and was able to wrestle people, and that kind of set up his power punching on the feet. He also got some stoppages through ground and pound. Those are all things that Rizin thought Sudario was going to be able to do to Junior Tafa. Tafa is a smallish heavyweight. He weighs in at like 235 or 240, but he's not a bulky heavyweight. He looks like a guy who might be able to make light heavyweight.
Yeah.
And against Tsuyoshi, he just used footwork, stayed out of his way, avoided his wild swings, and just pieced him up. He's a good kickboxer. It's ironic. He's not related to Justin Tafa, at least not closely, but he looks exactly like you took Justin Tafa and made him lose a bunch of weight. Like same mustache, same hair, same face, just slimmer. This fight is a pick'em, and I agree it's kind of a hard one to pick, but I'm leaning Tafa here. If Usman is able to get takedowns early, well, we're going to learn a whole lot about Junior Tafa, but I'll believe it when I see it. I think like Tafa's like footwork was surprisingly good to me in the Sudario fight. I think he's going to be able to avoid takedowns in the first round, or at least make Usman work for them. I still don't trust Usman's gas tank, and I know that Tafa has a ton of power. Give me Tafa by a second round knockout here.
Man, you're going all in on the Usman family just having a bad week, or bad month, I should say. Yeah, this is a tough fight, and I've never really been that high in Mohammed Usman. I mean, I get it; he's the brother of Kamaru Usman, so that he brings your eyes. But let's be honest, Mohammed Usman is holding the phone for fans a lot. You know what I mean? He's a low output counter striker who wings his shots. He throws a lot of single strikes because he's looking to land that perfect shot. Also has a little kind of duck and throw style. He loads up a lot. He does have power. I mean, we saw that in the finale of the Ultimate Fighter show. But he's looking for that KO every time. He will wrestle. He likes to kind of get in the clinch, very similar to Kamaru. He's not blasting through your hips. He's more of a chest to chest, work from there. Doesn't really set up his entries. He was hurt on the show by Mitchell Sipe, or Sipo, if I'm saying that wrong. And I think there was a fight. I think it was a fight to get in the finale. Like, I don't think he won. Like, I thought he should have lost. I don't know if it was that one. Or
that was the Perez fight. That was
Eduardo Perez.
Yeah, that was a really close. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I thought Eduardo Perez beat him, or it was really not a good showing. And Perez had a lot of success with calf kicking him. So Junior Tafa, there's not much film on him. He's got 4 fights and he knocks everybody out. So and they're quick. Now he's got a lot of boxing. I see his record. He's got some boxing matches. He's got some kickboxing matches. I never want to go off too much of that because that means really nothing to me. Like you pro box, okay. You could be fighting at the American Legion, $8 to get in, But what I've seen him, he's got a slip and rip style, straight punches, got great power. I'm a little more concerned with his takedown defense because 2 fights ago, he was taken down pretty quickly. But to his credit, he got back to his feet, and then he landed like the very first punch he threw and knocked the guy out. Usman should have the advantage on the ground, but I can see him throwing winging shots. I mean, he won his last fight by knockout. He's not feeling himself. I don't know if I like Tafa yet. What I do know is I don't like Usman. So I'll go Tafa. I'll say he clips him right in the first round, and I'll say Tafa wins my first round knockout.
Next up on the UFC Fight Night 222 prelims, Keith, during the intro, I forgot to ask you who on this card is closest to a title shot off of a win, but here we go. It's a women's featherweight matchup between Karol Rosa and
the main event. Yeah, the main event. Besides the main event. Yeah.
But other than that, the answer is always any women's featherweight that won.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Featherweight or bantamweight, really.
Yeah. Rosa, the 28-year-old Brazilian, is 16-4 overall. She is 5-1 in the UFC. Started off her UFC run with 4 straight wins before running into Sarah McMahon last March. Dropped a unanimous decision to the veteran former Olympian, but she bounced back from that at UFC 280 with a majority decision win over Lena Landsberg. Karol Rosa, probably excited to fight somebody under the age of 40, and she finally gets to in the form of Dumont. The 32-year-old Brazilian is 8-2 overall. She's 5-2 in the UFC. She also is coming off a win. She turned back the debuting Danielle Wolf at UFC 279 last September via unanimous decision. Prior to that, she had dropped a split decision to Macy Chasson at UFC 274. Worth noting that fight was scheduled to take place at 145 pounds and ended up being at 147-pound catch weight because of a weight miss. Dumont clearly has consigned herself to be a featherweight. Rosa, moving up to featherweight, decided that that's where her best future is. This fight is another dead pick'em. Both women available at -110. Keith, we have been, at least I've been squawking about this for the couple of years that we've been doing these shows together, that it's amazing to me how many women have been killing themselves, literally harming themselves in the case of like Aspen Ladd, to make 135 when they could fight at 145. It's the same champ at the top of that division and a much simpler route to get there. I like that Karol Rosa is just voluntarily kind of going to 145. I like that somebody apparently told Dumont, okay, you're not trying 135 anymore. This is your division. Who do you like in this fight?
You know what the UFC should do? They should just combine the two divisions, 135 and 145, and just call it the 140-pound weight class. And just get like, man, it is all right. That's it. You're the 140-pound champion.
Hey, just call it women's heavyweight. Everything 135, like everything over 126 pounds is just women's heavyweight.
Kayla Harrison somewhere is like, what? Is she super heavyweight? This is one of these fights again when I just look at the card, and I don't think it's going to be the most like barn burner of a fight or anything like that, but just from a ranking sense, it's just that head scratcher. Why is this so far down? Again, based strictly on rankings, not on skill and how exciting the fight's going to be or anything like that.
Dude, we got Iasmin, Lucindo, and Brogan Walker both trying to get their first UFC win on the main card.
Yeah. They could switch these two fights. But I think the Lucindo, Walker Lucindo is a more fun fight. Yeah. But talent-wise, these are two of the better ones in the division. I don't have a strong read on Norma Dumont, and that's because she's so inconsistent. One fight she looks great, another fight she looks terrible. She's a technical striker that can fight out of both stances. I'd say she has fast hands, a busy jab, or I should say a stiff jab. She attacks with combos. I like her feedback right hand. She appears to kind of be developing some power. She works the body. She throws a lot of kicks. She's a good defensive fighter. She's pretty technically sound. She likes to parry punches, which is you've heard me say before. It's one of my favorites. One of my favorite defenses. She can grind in the clinch. It's a position she's very comfortable in. She can wrestle. She can get some takedowns. When she hits down Ashley Evans Smith, Felicia Spencer, Aspen Ladd. She's got good ground and pound. She didn't. It's funny. There's what I talk about consistency. Like she didn't give up any takedowns to people like that, like Spencer, Felicia Spencer, and Aspen Ladd, and even Ashley Evans Smith is a pretty strong wrestler. But her wrestling looked absolutely horrendous against Macy Hassan. Macy Hassan was taken out with ease. So, and she really struggled to get back to the feet. So it's one of those, I don't really know where you get it. Now, Karol Rosa, she was a big bantamweight. So moving up to featherweight, I don't think that's going to be an issue for her. She is a little bit of a limited athlete, kind of flat-footed. She stands tall, but she's got good output, good accuracy, works behind a jab, follows with just a basic 1-2 combos. That's when she's going good. She can get a little wild sometimes and wing an overhand right, kind of telegraph and show. We saw that a lot at our last fight. She has, I'd say, plus power. We'll see if that power goes with her out of the division. I think it will. She's got good calf kicks. I mean, she beat up Jocelyn Edwards with calf kicks. She beat up Cachoeira with calf kicks. Vanessa Mello with calf kicks. I was shocked that she was dropped early to Lena Landsberg, but she recovered and beat her up the rest of the fight. She doesn't mind a grimy clinch battle either. I mean, she had a lot of success against Cachoeira in the clinch. She will wrestle, but she's definitely like a BJJ type wrestler. Strong top game, busy ground and pound. She couldn't stop takedowns against Sarah McMahon or get up on the bottom, but I mean, yeah, I do think Sarah McMahon's wrestling is extremely overrated in the sense that, she was in the Olympics. I don't know what it was. It was like almost 20 years ago or something like that. But still, for MMA, that's an elite wrestler in the division. So this is a hard fight to pick. Like, I get why the betting line is dead even. I was, when you were saying, the accolades of these women, I was wondering who was going to be the favorite. I have no confidence in this. I'm going to go with Dumont. I thought I was picking an upset, but apparently I'm not. I think she's going to win the clinch battle. I think she might be I just think she's a better overall wrestler. So give me Dumont by a split decision.
You summed it all up within the first 15 seconds there when you said Norma Dumont is so inconsistent, because I feel as though I know what I'm going to get out of Rosa, and my enthusiasm for her as a prospect really did it hit a wall in her last two fights. Yes, Sarah McMahon is a former Olympic silver medalist, but she was 41 years old and just should not have been able to bully Rosa that easily. And even in the win over Landsberg, she didn't look great in victory over another 40-year-old who was just 500 against Invicta and UFC level fighters. Landsberg made it to fight Cyborg just because Cyborg was killing everybody at the time, but was just never a top fighter and was well past her prime, fighting for the first time in a long time. That's somebody that I thought Rosa should have styled on and didn't, really struggled to beat her. So I feel as though I know where Rosa has stalled out, whereas Dumont looks like a totally different fighter from one fight to the next. You nailed the big feature of her game to me, where she has herself announced as a Sanda practitioner, and she kind of stands you're going to get that type of fight from her. And she clearly wants to, but her natural mentality, once punches start flying, once collisions start happening, she clearly thinks of the clinch as her safe place, and she clearly thinks of wrestling as a safety outlet. Like there's something in her that wants to wrestle, and she's pretty good at it. She was huge for bantamweight. She's not small for featherweight. She's very popular among the Shillen and Duffy show audience. I'm treading very carefully here, but there are many people in our comment sections who appreciate her low center of gravity on an aesthetic as well as on a professional level. But no, seriously, she's got thick legs and big hips, and just from her build, it helps her defensively and offensively in terms of wrestling, I think. If I knew that we were going to get good Norma Dumont, I'd feel pretty comfortable taking her here. As it is, Norma Dumont is always a coin flip, but I think even if we get bad Norma Dumont, it still feels like kind of a toss-up fight to me. I just think she's a better fighter, and I think she's going to be a little bigger than Rosa, and Rosa just hasn't functioned well against women who put up physical resistance to her. So I like Dumont by decision here as well. And all I'm really hoping for is that both women make weight. I mean, Dumont was one half of the heaviest women's fight in UFC history, and that we get a fun fight out of it. But give me Dumont by decision as well. We head now to the men's bantamweight division for a matchup between Yahya and Montel Jackson. Yahya, the 38-year-old Brazilian, is 28-10-1 with one no contest in his long and storied career. He is 13-4-1 with one no contest in the UFC, or if you include his WEC output as well, which you absolutely should since it is the same division, he is 17-7-1 with one no contest across both promotions. He is, surprisingly enough, on a 2-fight win streak. In his last 2 fights, he has a submission of Ray Rodriguez at UFC Fight Night, Edwards versus Mohammed, and a unanimous decision win over Kyung Ho Kong at UFC Fight Night Vieta versus Tate. However, that most recent fight was all the way back in November of 2021, so he's been away for about a year and a half. He had been scheduled to welcome Cody Garbrandt back to the division, but that fight was pushed twice because Yahya had a pretty severe neck injury that kept him on the shelf. They ended up doing other things with Garbrandt. Here he finally comes back and faces Jackson. Jackson, the 30-year-old Wisconsin native, is 12-2 overall. He is 6-2 since joining the UFC out of the second season of Dana White's Contender Series. He is on a 3-fight win streak since dropping a unanimous decision to Brett Johns back in July of 2020. Since then, he has a win over Jesse Strader, JP Bays, and most recently, Julio Arce, whom he defeated last November at UFC 281. That was the first Adesanya versus Pereira card. He will look to make it 4 straight at the expense of the veteran Yahya. He is strongly favored to do so. The biggest favorite on this card by far. He is minus 600, Yahya plus 450. Yeah, in minus 600. I will say this. I understand why Jackson is a huge favorite. He is much younger. I mean, he's only, quote, only 8 years younger in age, but in terms of mileage, it feels like he could be Hani Yahya's kid, just because Yahya's been doing this so long. I mean, we're talking about a guy in Hani Yahya. He might end up being the last WEC fighter to be active in the UFC, and he's not some guy that snuck in and had one fight. He had 7 fights in WEC. Jeez. I mean, he was beaten like Mark Hominick, Eddie Wineland, like in WEC way back in the day. And I assumed he would be gone by now because he was such a limited fighter, such a one-dimensional fighter, even in his prime. I assumed he'd be gone by now. I assumed that once his already modest athleticism gave out on him, that UFC level featherweights and bantamweights would just take him to the woodshed. But no, not only is he still around, since coming over to the UFC, he's 13-4-1. He's only lost 4 times in the UFC. He's beaten 13 people in the UFC. And granted, he's never been within shouting distance of a title shot. I mean, he hit his ceiling as a legitimate contender way back when he ran into like Joseph Benavidez and Chad Mendez types. But he's still beating middle of the roster guys in his mid to late 30s. Just, it's unbelievable how he does it. Everything that we say about Damian Maia goes for Hani Yahya. He is a super elite grappler. I mean, he won Abu Dhabi in his weight class in 2007. And he'd already had a few fights in WEC by then. He went and took 2007. He won Abu Dhabi. He went over and fought in K1 Dynamite and got his face kicked off by Kid Yamamoto. Came back and kept beating people up in WEC. But it is just the same thing as Damian Maia, a top shelf grappler who made it work in MMA without ever really developing a great striking game, without having the athleticism to make American wrestling style takedowns work. He just has this bag of tricks that has kept him relevant and kept him competitive in spite of everything. And it's even more so than Damian Maia, because Hani Yahya is a 40-fight veteran. This will be his 41st professional fight. He has 28 wins. He has 0 knockouts on his record. He has not even accidentally knocked somebody out with strikes. Even Damian Maia, the gentlest, nicest guy, the ultimate just Archie Suave, like jiu-jitsu practitioner, at least got a couple TKOs. Hani Yahya has never even accidentally knocked somebody out.
Not like you get a knockout, but it's really, you're in the mount and you start just punching the guy and the guy's tired,
Yeah. Never even by accident. Having said that, Hani Yahya has a little bit of a meaner ground approach than Damian Maia. He's not a huge bantamweight. He was a small featherweight, but he's super strong and he's not afraid to leverage that. So you see him getting stuff like arm triangle chokes. I mean, he certainly is willing to backpack somebody. What's that?
The heel hooks.
Yeah, like there's a little nastiness to Rani Yahya's grappling game, even though again he is just the nicest, silliest, most effusive dude. But all of this, really, this is my tribute in advance in case Montel Jackson like literally ends his life and we have to give a eulogy. But you know what? He is. I feel about every third fight. I feel myself feeling like this about Rani Yahya, and he at least survives. Like even now, I thought you were going the way you said that. I thought you were going with upset pick. I am not going with the upset here. Montel Jackson's nickname is Quick, and it's a very appropriate nickname. He is a plus athlete. He is going to look a full weight class bigger than Yahya. I mean, if we had it over again, if Rani Yahya was 22 right now instead of 38, he would have started as a flyweight and moved up to bantamweight in his 30s. You know, like he won Abu Dhabi at around, I forget what the exact number is on that weight class. I think it's like adds up to like 138 or something.
Rani Yahya looks like the guy who goes to the jiu-jitsu gym and like rolls with people, and they're like, "All right, guys, we're gonna start practicing doing like 10 push-ups." And he's like, "Come on, we don't do push-ups." You know, like what are we doing here? Let's just roll. But, like he goes to do push-ups, and like someone has to like fix his technique. You know, he's doing push-ups, his butt's in the air or something.
He's doing like the modified girl push-ups on his knees. Yeah, or like on his knee, like just on his knees instead of his toes. Yeah. All right, but Montel Jackson, way bigger than Yahya and blindingly fast with a ton of power and good defensive wrestling. Stylistically, he is, if you designed a fighter in a lab to kick Rani Yahya's ass, it would be Montel Jackson. I mean, that's pretty much it. Very good wrestlers have been able to get him down, but even there, he's active. He wants to get back to his feet. He doesn't concede the position. And if you're a good but not great wrestler, I mean, JP Bays did not have success trying to get this man down. Yeah, this is just tailor-made for him to tee off on Rani Yahya. And it's been a while since Yahya. Oh my goodness. Joseph Benavidez is the last person to finish Rani Yahya. So Rani Yahya, been in the UFC for 18, 19 fights, has never been finished in the UFC. It was crazy. Benavidez all the way back at WEC 45 in December of 2009.
Wow, that's crazy.
So it's been over 14 years since he's been finished. That time has come around again. Like, we've seen what it looks like when Yahya takes on a modern bantamweight who's a good athlete and a good wrestler. Ricky Simone just washed him. But Simone didn't offer on the feet what Jackson does. I think Jackson's going to stuff takedowns, stay in his preferred range, and just lamp Rani Yahya. Give me Jackson by first round knockout here, and it'll be a sad day. Even though I have nothing against Montel Jackson.
Yeah. Rani Yahya is 37. It might as well be 57.
Yeah.
He's on the feet. He's a very awkward striker
awkward is being nice.
He's clearly lost a step, but I'll say this, on the feet, he's extremely aggressive. Like, he throws every shot with mean intentions. No, sure. When they land, nothing happens. But
like when one of your kids is like 5 and they just throw their full on tantrum and just they're coming for you, man.
Yeah. He's wild because he hopes you're dumb enough to try to, like, just out of instinct, like when a guy throws looping crazy spinning shots or looping, punches that you just instinct in the gym is just to drop down and take him down. He's like hoping you would do that, or he's hoping that you put your hands up so he can kind of throw these winging shots into a shot. Now, he's a good wrestler. He's not blasting through your hips or anything, but he gets in, get to your hips, turn the corner or get to your hips and even pull guard. And then you mentioned he's elite of the elite grapplers. I mean, great at winning scrambles, crazy slick back takes, 12 submissions. I've said this before. He's like a wide variety of submissions too. He's not like a specialist. Like he gets any kind of submission. You go down the Fight Finder, just look at the ways he's won. He gets subs in every different way. But at this age, besides the damage he's taken and the limited athlete he already was, cardio is becoming a major issue. Like he can go hard for about 7.5 minutes. Like he's kind of turning that, like we talked about, like a Jim Miller or something. Where you can go hard for that, but if you can survive that, you be feeling pretty good. Now you're talking about Montel Jackson. I think you like undersold how big this guy is. Like I met him in person. He looks like a welterweight. He's a big dude. Long arms, southpaw, fast hands, throws pistons down the pipe. Very good at hand fighting. He gets in there, he grabs your hands, and then he moves your hands out of the way to land his own shots. Good power. I mean, he blasted Brett Johns. He blasted Jesse Strader. It's surprising how good his power is because he actually will pull his punches a little bit and not really commit to him, which is, really step into him, and he still knocks guys out. Strong in the clinch, can grind in there. He looks for foot sweeps and stuff. He's a good wrestler. I mean, he out-wrestled JP Blaydes. In fairness, as you mentioned, like JP Blaydes couldn't get him down. Jackson, Blaydes is moving up from flyweight, and Jackson's huge bantamweight. The issue is he has been out-wrestled in some of his losses, like Ricky Simone out-wrestled and Brett Johns out-wrestled him. Much different wrestlers than Yahya is. But JP Blaydes, who's undersized, did take him down at least once. Mm-hmm. And actually had him briefly mounted in that fight and had his back taken and almost actually got a sub in a fight that Montel Jackson won pretty much the entire rest of the fight. If Montel Jackson on top, he has some really mean ground and pound. So I said all that to say that this is going to be a really dumb pick. I see Jackson. I mean, I can see Jackson being way too big for Yahya, being too strong, being too explosive. I can see him blasting Yahya into next week. But Yahya only needs one takedown to do his thing. I say he does it. I say he gets it to the ground. A scramble happens, and Yahya locks in a submission. Give me the biggest upset of the night. Lock it in. Is that the biggest upset?
You just called the biggest upset of the year if that happens.
Okay. Yeah. Yahya, first round submission.
I so hope you're right.
So do I. And when you go with a big submission like that, you're a genius. You get it right. You get it wrong. You go, yeah, I was just fucking around.
Yeah. You ready for Ricky Glenn versus Christos Giagos?
I knew I was picking a big upset before you even said the line. I didn't realize how big. When you said, "Oh, he's the biggest favorite of the card," I'm like, "Oh, nice."
Yeah, and
it's going to happen one of two ways. It's either going to be like Yahya unconscious bad, or he catches a submission and some crazy shit. That just because of that is why I wouldn't put the line as big as it is, because he still has that ability to do that.
Well, sure. I mean, if you're the betting type, why wouldn't you sprinkle a little bit on?
I say I don't know.
Plus, the guy's like plus 450.
Yeah, I don't know what the under is, but I'd bet the under. Stoppage, not go to decision. I'm whatever.
Next up, the lightweights take the cage as it is Ricky Glenn against Christos Giagos. Glenn, the 34-year-old Team Alpha Male product, is 22-6-2 overall. He is 4-3-1 in the UFC. Has generally alternated wins and losses, but actually had a draw of all things in his last appearance. That was all the way back in October of 2021 at UFC Fight Night, Costa versus Vettori. Majority draw against Grant Dawson. He's back in the cage after over a year and a half, and waiting for him will be Giagos. The 33-year-old Los Angeles native is 19-10 overall. He is an even 4-4 in the UFC. He is coming off back-to-back losses, and they are back-to-back first-round finish losses. But in his defense, they have been against top 10 talents in Arman Tsarukyan and Thiago Moises. The most recent of those, the Moises fight, was last June on the UFC on ESPN Tsarukyan versus Gamrot card. Nonetheless, Giagos looking to get back in the win column here. He is not favored to do so. Glenn right now is minus 200 or so. Giagos out there around plus 160 on the comeback. Keith, the lightweight division in the UFC is obviously one of the deepest. It's one of the biggest in terms of just sheer number of fighters. So especially if somebody doesn't fight for a year and a half and they weren't ranked before, it's kind of easy to forget about them. That guy. Ricky Glenn, he's not that bad. Neither is Christos Giagos. I mean, they're both going into their mid-30s at this point. I think they're both pretty well-known quantities.
Sure.
But they're not bad fighters. It's just a great division. Tell me a little bit about this fight and who you like in it.
Yeah, this is a fight when you have so many fights on the card, you have to like sacrifice one for film study. And this is one that I didn't do as much as I wish. I feel like I do that a lot with Ricky Glenn, and ultimately he fights and I go, oh yeah, like he's way better than I remember. He's just one of those guys like, wow. I mean, he's well-rounded. He's got high volume, southpaw, a very unorthodox, like herky-jerky kind of guy. He uses a lot of feints, strong kicks to the body, especially against orthodox fighters, plus power, stronger wrestler. I was surprised how easily he was taken down by Dennis Bermudez and Grant Dawson, though. But he works elbows on the ground. He blasts the guy, works back to his feet, and he keeps going. I mean, he's one of these guys. He's kind of like a little bit of an overachiever. No, Giagos, he's a good athlete. He's got some high volume, flows between stances really well. He because of his style, he's so he throws a lot of like spinning, high energy, explosive strikes, which can kind of tie him down. He tries to take his opponent's head off with pretty much every single punch he throws. He often overthrows his shots and can kind of load up on a lot of things and fights at a really wild pace. He will wrestle. He's got some hard ground and pound. He has a BJJ black belt. It's got some good back takes. But in fairness, he was subbed pretty quickly by Thiago Moises. So, I mean, there's definitely different levels of BJJ. And because of his style, he gets tired. So I have a hard time, picking Ricky Glenn because of how inconsistent and, having a hard read on him. But I am going to go with him, though. I think he can weather that early storm of Giagos and then start to, when he slows down, Ricky Glenn picks up the pace, picks up the volume, wins the last 2 rounds, comes on strong, kind of similar like he did against Grant Dawson. This time I see he gets a decision win.
Yeah, I like everything you put out there. Giagos, just by the eyeball test, looks like a guy who must have a cut to make the 155 because he's an absolute specimen, obviously. Like he's jacked as hell and fights with no regard for his gas tank. You mentioned like he's willing to wrestle, and it's a very high energy expenditure type of wrestling when he wrestles. Like just working super hard for a double, straining against somebody who's like trying to wide leg against the fence where, he's burning like 5 times as much energy as the other guy. He's that kind of fighter. Throws really hard punches, and anybody who's trained at all, will tell you that missing with a hard punch takes so much out of your gas tank. And not to put too fine a point on it, but Christos Giagos misses with a lot of big punches in his fight sometimes. And he's going against a guy in Glenn where Glenn is going to be the taller guy, but he's definitely not going to be the heavier or bigger guy. We're talking about a former featherweight. I mean, it's easy to forget, but Ricky Glenn was your final World Series of Fighting featherweight champ. It's easy to remember all the other ones, Bantamweight, you had Marlon Moraes. At lightweight, you had Justin Gaethje. Yeah. You had the same man holding down the middleweight and light heavyweight titles at the same time. Ricky Glenn's the forgotten man, but he's the guy that hammered Georgi Karahanyan into quitting on the stool between rounds because he hurt him. Yeah, that's a long time ago, man. World Series of Fighting never died. Nobody ever says WSOF never die. Like it's not like Pride or WEC. Glenn, it's mildly concerning that he's coming off an injury layoff that's had him on the shelf for over 18 months. You always wonder what you're going to get when somebody comes back from that, again, especially at 34. But assuming he is at least the fighter who kind of held on to pull out a draw against Dawson, I do favor him against Giagos as well here. And by the method you mentioned, just probably by kind of outlasting him and taking the second and third rounds from a tired opponent. So give me Glenn as well here. I don't know if I'm 2-1 odds confident in it, but I do generally lean his way as well. Next up, we head to the welterweight division for Jeremiah Wells versus Matthew Semelsberger. Wells, the 36-year-old Pennsylvania native, is 11-2-1 overall. He's a perfect 3-0 since joining the UFC out of Northeast promotions like CES and CFFC. But he has 3 straight finishes. Knocked out Warley Alves in his UFC debut back in 2021. Fought twice last year, choking Mike Blood Diamond Mathetha all the way to sleep at UFC 271 in February, and then lamping Court McGee in the first round at UFC on ESPN, Cater versus Emmett in June. 10 months later, he is back looking for his 4th straight win, where even in the welterweight division, you're going to start getting attention. And looking to foil him in that pursuit will be Semelsberger. The 30-year-old Maryland native is 11-4 overall. He is 5-2 in the UFC. He's coming off a win. He took a unanimous decision in December over Jake Matthews at UFC Fight Night, Cannonier versus Strickland. That got him back on track after a unanimous decision loss to Alex Morono at UFC 277 in July. So 2 not exactly young prospects, even if they have a bit of prospect feel, looking to take a step forward in the ultra competitive 170-pound division. And this is yet one more fight on this card that is a dead pick'em. Both gentlemen out there at -110. Keith, I kind of alluded a moment ago, this feels like a prospect fight, even though one man is 30 and the other is 36. Tell me how much upside you see in Wells. He's looking to go 4-0 in the UFC, but this is his 15th professional fight, and he's 36 years old.
Yeah, that's the bad thing. The one thing I don't like about Jeremiah Wells, but I kind of like both these guys, if I'm being honest. Semelsberger, he's been more active, and he's a good athlete. He's very explosive. He's a boxer with some quick hands. Fights behind a very traditional high guard boxing defense, slip and rip style. I love his slip right hand. I like that he works the body. He's got huge power. I mean, when he connects, you look what he did to Jason Witt, Martin Cino. He deads guys. you know. He can look for the KO a little too much. He tried doing that against your boy Alex Moreno, where Moreno was able to use footwork and avoid a lot of those shots. He also can be, for a guy who can crack and he's got some speed, he can be trigger shy at times, throwing single strikes. I hate that he backs straight on the center line. Backs up straight on the center line. He's a decent wrestler. He needs to improve his takedown defense, though. He hasn't shown too much in the grappling. He did struggle to keep Carlton Minus off his back, which was has not aged well. And he slowed down in several fights, which is concerning. Now, Wells, he's a short guy for the weight class, but he's got these long arms, very unique build to him. He fights out of both stances, very fast, very explosive. Often comes out very aggressive, trying to end the fight early. We saw that against Warley Alves. We saw that against Court McGee. He whips punches with just such force. It's like G-force out there. I was there live when he broke Gary Balletto's jaw with a single strike. He closes the distance across the cage so quickly. Very reminds me of what I've talked about with Kevin Holland, where they can just one step and they're to the middle of the cage, which is ironic for a guy who's shorted. Just the way he closes distance. Very when Kevin Raildeman used to throw a hook and just wow, look how fast he can be. His footwork. He loves spinning attacks and flying knees. He's a solid wrestler. Doesn't wrestle enough, but we saw, we usually see his defensive wrestling, but we saw that he could grapple a little bit when he beat Blood Diamond again. Not the hardest guy to submit, but just showing that he's even though he's this knockout machine, he goes, hey, I have a huge advantage on the ground. Let me go take this fight to the ground. I think this fight is fire. This is going to be a really fun fight. At least I hope it is. Sometimes when two guys can really crack, they get a little gun shy. I'm not predicting that, though. I like both guys. I'd say Semelsberger is the more technically sound one. But I'm going to go the other way. This is probably the first time that he isn't the more explosive guy, where he isn't the more powerful guy. I think both guys could have their moments, but I think it happens until Wells lands as a big shot. And I think Wells is going to continue to buzz up the rankings. The age is concerning, especially a guy who really relies on explosion. But I'm going to say he has at least one more explosive moment in them, and I see he knocks out Semelsberger in the first round.
Wow. All right. This was probably the hardest fight on the card for me to pick, just because.
Yeah, I get it.
Because I can picture exactly what you're talking about there happening. Also, I can picture Semelsberger doing the same to him. He has a ton of power as well, and he's not as aggressive right out the gate, but I mean, he has a 15-second knockout in the UFC.
Yeah, he's a clean fighter, man.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
I do agree that he's shown occasional holes, especially in his takedown defense. He got taken down quickly and pretty easily by AJ Fletcher in their fight, but Fletcher slowed down even faster than Semelsberger does, and by the second round, he was winning the wrestling, exchanges. He was winning the transitions. He, either mounted Semelsberger, had his back, Fletcher, mounted Fletcher, had his back. It just really took over. I'm leaning Semelsberger here, but I'm going to be especially nervous in the first round because I think Wells is such a fast starter, so aggressive. Semelsberger, he's a very, very, he's a big welterweight with long reach, and he's early in fights. He often fights like, he is kind of depending on his reach, and he trusts that people aren't going to be able to land punches on his head until he kind of has his time to establish the range and the rhythm. If he comes out at all lackadaisical, Wells could knock him out in 30 seconds, and this could be over real quick. Give me Semelsberger to win a decision here in a real fun fight, and probably have to walk through some fire to do so. I kind of hope and expect Semelsberger to lean on some offensive wrestling here from time to time. I'd like to see more of that out of him. But like I said, this was the hardest fight on the card for me to pick. I'm taking Semelsberger here by decision, but not with a whole lot of confidence. Next up on the UFC Vegas 71 main card is a strawweight matchup between Iasmin Lucindo and Brogan Walker. Two women still looking for their first octagon victory. Lucindo, the 21-year-old Brazilian, is 13-5 overall. She is 0-1 in the UFC. She debuted back in August at UFC on ESPN Vera versus Cruz, where she dropped a unanimous decision to fellow debutante Yasmin Jauregui. She will look to get it back against Walker. The 34-year-old Guamanian is 7-3 overall. She is also 0-1 in the UFC. She made her debut. She came to the UFC through the 30th season of The Ultimate Fighter after having competed in Invicta as well. But she debuted last August at UFC on ESPN Santos versus Hill, where she got pounded out in the third round by Juliana Miller. Odds here heavily favor Lucindo. She is minus 310, Walker plus 230 as the underdog. I understand why Iasmin Lucindo is favored here. She showed plenty of spark in her loss to Yasmin Jauregui last year. She is over a decade younger. She's one of the 5 or 6 youngest fighters in the UFC. And just by the eyeball test, she seems to have a lot of upside. She's super young. She's athletic. Was competitive and often dominant against some obviously bigger women on the regional scene, which she better because she's going to be undersized in the UFC. Like, she's short and stocky for a strawweight. She's not quite Jessica Andrade short, not quite Loma Lookboonmee, but she's in that same neighborhood where she's.
I've compared her to Claudia Gadelha.
That's a perfect example because
like not super short, but yeah,
not super short,
stocky,
short and stocky. And there's no question like, oh, well, if there was an atom weight division, because no, like she's too bulky and stocky. Yeah. Like she's not someone like Jinyu Fry or Michelle Waterson where you look at them and you're like, well, yeah, they have made 105. Yasmin Lucindo may make him 105. But I mean, she beat Sarah Frota, who fought in the UFC at flyweight and wasn't a terribly small flyweight in Brazil. So, I mean, she's a strawweight who's beaten at least a bad UFC flyweight. And yeah, like I say, like aggressive, tons of power, athletic, strong, and at her age and kind of the way her development has come, like her fighting increasingly better competition on her way to the UFC, I have every reason to believe she's probably still improving, maybe improving substantially from fight to fight. She's had, 8 months since her last fight. And she's going against someone in Walker who is very much a known quantity. When Walker made her debut in the UFC last summer, and I kind of started to do study on her, I was surprised that was only her 10th fight. I expected her to have like 20 fights just because she's been around for what feels like a long time. She was on some fairly high profile Invicta cards. So I just expected her to be much more veteran than she is. And she's 34 now, but she's well-rounded, but not great at anything. She's pretty strong, but she's not a plus athlete. So to me right now, like her losing to Miller, that was probably the best version of Brogan Walker there's ever going to be. And here it's also 8 months later for her. At best, she's probably going to be about the same fighter. At worst, maybe there's already the start of the decline. So I get why Lucindo is the favorite here. Walker, generally speaking, has been tough game, hard to put away. Her loss to Miller last summer was her first stoppage loss, and Miller just had to get her on the ground and bully her and pound her out. But I'm picking Lucindo to do the same. Lucindo is a fast starter who hits really hard. Give me Lucindo to hurt Walker early here, maybe knock her down, finish it on the ground with ground and pound. But Yasmin Lucindo by first round TKO.
Yeah, this is not a bad fight in a talent sense, but yeah, I just want to go back to what we talked about earlier. Like, it's just weird to have two fighters looking for their first UFC win, who doesn't have like a big marketable push behind them.
Thank you. I was going to say, normally when you have one like this on the main card, you can at least say why really easily.
Yeah.
It's someone who's famous for something, like it's CM Punk, or it's,
sure,
somebody that's got 500,000 OnlyFans followers, or something like that. Or this ain't that.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at the people on the prelims, again, Norma Dumont, Kyle Hosa, like that one makes sense in a ranking sense. I'm blanking on his name. Kamaru Usman's brother there.
Yeah. Muhammad Usman versus Junior Tafa.
Mohammed. Sorry. Yeah. Muhammad. He just won the Ultimate Fighter show.
He just won the Ultimate Fighter.
He's way buried in the prelims. On the same show, the woman who lost is on the main card. The guy who won, who has the famous brother, is on the prelim. I'm not saying that's the fight I would do, but then I would get it.
Yeah.
Plus, you had the heavyweight thing that they like doing.
Yeah, and it's a unranked heavyweight fight that's probably going to end in the first round. Like, that's exactly the thing that the UFC normally promotes to the main card. Even if you were going to do a prospect fight, Marshall versus Gomis is probably higher level than this.
Yeah, I agree. So, anyways, to this fight itself, I think I'm a little bit higher in Brogan Walker than you are. She's southpaw. I like her output, very high output. Wins fights with her pressure. It's very controlled pressure. Like, she likes to rush in and land and then dart back out of range before she gets countered. Busy jab. She sets up her power shots with a lot of feints. She loves to lead with her lead right hook, so she's southpaw and like wrapping that right hook as a lead shot, which is you don't see a lot, that's why I probably like it. She also I like she actually throws a check right hook too. If you kind of pressure her, she likes that. So she's very right hook happy. Her straight left is an accurate one. Nice snap on the shots. She keeps her hands out a little too wide defensively, which I don't like. It's going to leave her for a lot of shots coming up the middle. She can also reach a little bit too much for my liking. She keeps her chin too high in the air. She will look for takedowns, and she has a BJJ black belt. But she's not a strong wrestler. She more gets takedowns from dropping on a single or a double when her opponents load up and throw something too far. I like when she struggled stopping takedowns with Juliana Miller, but on the show, Hannah Guy, Laura Gallardo was trying to take her down, and she went to like a front headlock series with knees to the body in both of them. It was just something I like. I think we should see more of like a front headlock series, like punishing people for missing takedowns. Her scrambling is a little weird. Like she had her back taken by Hannah Guy in that fight, a fight that she was winning, which was concerning. I also questioned her fight IQ a little bit. Well, I just praised her for the front headlock. She kept trying to close the distance on Juliana Miller, despite that being Miller's best path to victory. That was a little surprising. She couldn't stop takedowns from Miller. She struggled to get back up. And going back to the Hannah Guy fight, she was winning pretty good. She gassed out pretty late in that one. I should say it was winning pretty good. It was a back and forth fight, but I mean, like, she won the fight, and she kind of gassed. Lucindo only 21, so I like that. Now, not very experienced, but I think she has tons of potential. Like you said, shorter fighter, but stockier, like a Claudia Gadelha, tight boxing, throws a lot of heat, good power. She has 8 KOs, super durable. Like, and I'm going to butcher the female's name that she fought last one. Yasmin Yurgi. Yeah. Yurgi was like teeing off on her in shots, and she was eating shots and just kept coming forward, trying to land her own shots. She can grind in the clinch. She likes upper body takedowns from the clinch. Good top control. She likes to advance position on the ground. Does batter her opponents on the ground, which I like. She has 2 submission wins, but though she has been subbed twice herself, so that's a little concerning. I'm with you, even though I did just say I like Walker more than you do. I like Lucindo here. She's the bull. I expect her to keep marching forward 15 minutes, landing tight hooks, maybe get to the clinch, land some dirty boxing, just be the more physical, stronger fighter, which is kind of ironic that she's a young one. Walker's pretty durable herself. I mean, she's going against some good people and made it to the distance. So I think she takes the beat and makes it to the scorecards. Give me Lucindo in a pretty one-sided affair.
The UFC Vegas 71 main card soldiers on with a lightweight matchup between Bobby Green and Jared Gordon. Green, the 36-year-old Californian, is 29-14-1 across a well-traveled career. He is 10-9-1 in the UFC, and he is coming to this fight off of back-to-back knockout losses. He was TKO'd on the ground by Islam Makhachev in the short notice main event of UFC Fight Night 202 last February, then came back in December and engaged in maybe the most entertaining 7.5 minutes of UFC action that month before getting knocked out cold in the second round. He will look to get back in the win column here against Gordon. The 34-year-old New Yorker is 19-6 overall. He is 7-5 in the UFC. He is 2-2 since moving up to lightweight. He worked at featherweight early on, had at least one catchweight fight at like 150 pounds in between, but he's 2-2 since moving up to lightweight. He is a former CFFC featherweight champ. He is coming off of a loss. It was a close, if not contentious, unanimous decision loss to Paddy Pimblett last December at UFC 282. Prior to that, he had taken a unanimous decision over Leonardo Santos at UFC 278 in August. So he'll look to get back in the win column as well here. He is not favored to do so. Gordon is plus 210, Green minus 250. Keith, who do you like in this one, and how?
Yeah, this is a tough one. Both guys have their backs against the wall, so both need a desperate for a win. You got to feel for Jared Gordon. As a lot of people thought he beat Paddy Pimblett, a very controversial fight, and Bobby Green, who had a nice little run, is now falling short. Bobby Green, a lot of my notes are going to be what I've always said. Like, he doesn't change. He's a boxer who can fight out of both stances. He does drop his hands, keeps his hands low, relying totally on head movement. But because of that, I've always said he lands from weird angles. He throws like an up jab, with that being one of his best punches. I've said this about him too. Like, another thing that always stands out to me, he's got that rare ability to land while backing up. Very few guys can do that. I like that he's added elbows when he's in close, slicing guys there. But a thing about Bobby Green, he falls in that category that we've talked about other fighters in the past. He can cruise and lacks urgency. One of these guys where he really Nate Diaz, Jorge Masvidal type, where if he's not getting hit, not hurting, he doesn't realize the optics of it, that not matching him, looks poor. Plus, Bobby Green has a style where he rolls with punches, which never looks good. So while it's taking away the power or just blocking in general, it still looks like you're getting hit, even though he doesn't get hurt often. Now, obviously, Drew Dober knocked him out in his last fight, so that's not the case I'm talking about. But Dober is pound for pound one of the hardest hitters in the UFC. And before that, Green was doing very well. So he's a good defensive wrestler. He does well when he gets taken down to get back to his feet, unless he's facing like an Islam Makhachev, but that's the exception. Very underrated offensive wrestler, though he almost never looks for it. Though I did say this last time when I looked it up on his record, he actually has more takedowns than I think of him. Like he does wrestling more than I give him credit for. Jared Gordon, he's a minus athlete, but he makes it up for it just with output. He doesn't have like major holes in his game. He's pretty technical, very boxing heavy style when it's striking, keeps everything inside. He just isn't the athlete to make it very dangerous. He doesn't hit hard enough. He isn't explosive enough. He does have some defensive holes when he drops his hands. He also gets to the cage. He likes to pillar. He can grind in the clinch. We saw that in his last fight against Paddy Pimblett. He's a very underrated wrestler. I've kept this in my notes about him for a while. I was really impressed when he out-wrestled Chris Fishgold. Like, that's a guy that I thought would have a huge wrestling advantage on him, and he was the one getting the takedowns. He's a good grappler, good control, hard ground and pound. As far as a prediction, this is a tough one to pick because, I think the line is way off. I think the line should be much closer. Bobby Green's like, what'd you say, like 2.5-1 to favor?
Minus 250.
Yeah. To me, that's someone who hasn't watched Bobby Green fight, because Bobby Green can be so much more talented than a guy, and it's still going to be a razor close fight, just the way he fights. Gordon is a gamer, and Green isn't. Gordon can step up his game against more talented guys and make it a close fight, while Green can tend to fight down to his competition and make it a closer fight than it should be. I'm still going to go with Green because he's much faster on the feet. I do think he's going to get pressed against the cage. I think he's going to have to fight off a bunch of takedown attempts, fighting off the cage and rolling his eyes to the, referee and stuff like that. But I think when they break, he'll land the better shots on the feet. He'll, obviously the emphasis is damage. I think he'll be the one doing more damage. Give me Green by decision.
Yeah. So let's take a little walk down memory lane here. On January 24th, 2009, upstart MMA promotion Affliction put on their Day of Reckoning card at the Honda Center in Anaheim.
Still a great name.
Well, it was a Day of Reckoning as it featured Fedor Emelianenko, the uncrowned king of the heavyweights, against former UFC champ Andrei Arlovsky.
Oh, Arlovsky, okay.
Famously,
Did I ever tell you the story? Let me tell you the story before you're done.
I will. Like, one of the most iconic photos in MMA history, where Emelianenko is walking off just stone cold as Arlovsky is asleep face down with his eyes closed, having thrown that flying knee, gotten swatted out of the air. The rest of that card, pretty much the best you could put together outside of the UFC. Josh Barnett pounding out Gilbert Yvel, Vitor Belfort trashing Matt Linden in like 30 seconds. But in the either main card opener or the top prelim, 21-year-old rising prospect Dan the Upgrade Lauzon choked out up-and-coming 22-year-old prospect Bobby Green in the closing seconds of the first round, marking Lauzon as obviously the future of the lightweight division, pointing the way towards his illustrious career and relegating Green to the dustbin of history, where he'd never be heard of again. Except no, it's 14 years later, and Green is in the UFC and briefly hit the top 15 last year, and Dan Lauzon hasn't fought in like 9 years.
No, Dan Lauzon's in like a Dunkin' Donuts somewhere telling people how he used to fight in the UFC, and Dan Lauzon is the complete opposite of Joe Lauzon. Yes. Not just the talent, I mean, the personality Joe Lauzon is obviously extremely successful, very intelligent, like good. He's the guy. Remember when the UFC had to go around and convince states to regulate it? You have Rich Franklin going to New York, the former teacher, and Joe Lauzon. If that was the case today, Joe Lauzon would be the guy to be sent around.
Oh, for sure.
Dan Lauzon's the guy that he's at a Dunkin' Donuts, and a guy walks in and he looks at us, notices him. What are you looking at? What are you looking at? You know who I am? That's Dan Lauzon. At least he was last time I saw him. I'm hoping he finally have grown up.
I mean, he's 35 now, so hopefully. Anyway, long way around to say.
Let me, real quick, can I stop? Can I
tell me your story.
Let me tell you real quick, Fedor. So I actually got that. It was a pay-per-view. I had a house of good friends over, and it was downpouring, raining, and we were wind whipping. And we thought we were going to lose power the entire night. And we did not lose power the night except for about a 5-second window.
Oh.
This is like a movie. Like you'd see in like a comedy, like Simpsons or something. The power went out. Arlovsky was doing well. The power came back on, and Arlovsky's laid out unconscious.
What happened? That's like something that would happen on an episode of like Married with Children or King of Queens or something. Where just the schlubby like house husband. It's like, what happened in the game?
Yeah, that's my Andre Arlovsky versus Fedor.
Oh my goodness, that's too funny.
I called them up, tried to get it for free, convinced them, and they were like, "No, as long as you get some portion, deal with it." Tough shit.
Yeah, you're like the.
And then I did that. I'll never order another MMA pay-per-view again.
So 14 years later, Keith Schillen never watched another fight.
Yeah, never.
Oh, well, the reason I even brought that up was I was going to introduce this segment talking about how at 36, Bobby Green will probably end up being the last active UFC fighter who fought in Strikeforce. We're seeing the Zach Cummings and Ed Hermans of the world.
Okay.
Clay Guida. Those were 3 of the last Strikeforce guys. Okay, they're all over 40 or pushing 40.
Okay.
And like Robbie Lawler might be done. Like Amanda Nunes might retire soon. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, Green, for one thing, he's not a guy that just dipped into Strikeforce for one fight. He left. He joined the UFC having gone 5-0 in his last 5 in Strikeforce. I mean, he walked right in as a fringe contender. But while I was doing that, I realized, holy hell, he fought at Affliction. I know he's the last active fighter who fought at that thing. Like, where's Babalu Sabral right now? Gilbert? Geez, like, Babalu. I hope Gilbert Yvel isn't in prison. Gilbert
Yvel is probably thrown down with Dan Lauzon at Dunkin' Donuts.
Yeah, and I mean, if I get in trouble, I end up spending like Saturday night in the drunk tank. Maybe I run into Paul Buentello here or something. He's from Texas.
Paul Buentello.
Anyway, Green feels like he's been around forever because he's been around forever. I mean, he fought in Affliction, which again, for about 12 months was trying to compete head to head with the UFC. And he did it when he was like 22 years old. There's nothing I can really add to your tactical and strategic breakdown of this fight. You pointed out Bobby Green is lackadaisical and loses rounds or has unnecessarily close rounds because of that. And specifically against guys that come forward and throw a lot of volume like Gordon.
Yeah.
He could lose a unanimous decision 29-28 and be the only surprised person in the arena when it's read out, like that kind of thing.
Yeah. You make me question my pick. Yeah.
Normally I don't go in too much for intangibles. I would just much rather pick the more skilled fighter who's in better, physical condition. But it bothered me when Green was so happy to get knocked out by Drew Dober. That was something that was kind of new from him, where he got knocked out and he's up kind of like laughing about it. And
yeah,
that felt like, again, and I am not a psychologist. Even if I were, that doesn't make me Bobby Green's psychologist. But I've interviewed Green a few times. I've followed him as a fighter for a long time. That's something you wouldn't have seen from him 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. That looked kind of like a guy who's collecting a couple more paychecks before he retires. And he's like, hey, if I have a good fight, maybe I get a bonus. But either way,
yeah,
that bothers me. Because Green versus Gordon, Green is better at almost everything. He's a little bit bigger. He's a better athlete. He's a better boxer. When he wants to be, he's a better wrestler. All the problems. The only reason that you would be hesitant to pick him are the intangibles. Which Bobby Green are you going to get? Are you going to get like dancing showman, I'm weaving and bobbing and not throwing Bobby Green? Are you going to get Bobby Green that if Gordon hits him and stings him, like bites down and just starts swinging in the pocket like he did against Dustin Poirier and gets lamped? I'm still leaning Green, but if I were a betting man, I'm not minus 250 confident in this fight. Because if Green has checked out in any way, his already kind of questionable fight IQ could really go off a cliff. I've got Green by decision here. Gordon is traditionally pretty hard to hurt, pretty hard to finish. But yeah, give me Green to win, but I'm sort of confident in it, but I'm not 2.5 to 1 confident in it. Third from the top at UFC Vegas 71 is a middleweight matchup between Brad Tavares and Bruno Silva. Tavares, the 35-year-old Hawaiian, is 19-7 overall. He is 14-7 since joining the UFC as the runner-up of the 11th season of The Ultimate Fighter. He is coming off a loss. He dropped a unanimous decision to Dricus du Plessis at UFC 276 last July. Prior to that, he had back-to-back wins over future PFL millionaire Antonio Carlos Jr. and Omari Akhmedov. Both of those took place in 2021. His only fight of last year was the du Plessis fight. He returns here looking to get back into the win column against Silva, who can say the same. The 33-year-old Brazilian is 22-8 overall. He's 3-2 in the UFC. However, that is 3 wins followed by 2 losses. He won his first 3 fights in the UFC, all by knockout, mincing himself a potential title contender in that wide open division before running into Alex Pereira, where he bumped into a bigger, better striker. That was last March, then came back in August and was a special guest on the Gerald Meerschaert show, where he won most of the first 2 rounds before going right into a guillotine in the third, the classic Gerald Meerschaert story. So Silva looking not to make it 3 in a row here. He is a slight underdog in that endeavor. Tavares minus 160, Silva plus 130. Now, Keith, you and I have been doing previews for UFC cards for, I believe it's over 2 years now. We've been doing recaps for almost as long. We started doing recaps, within a month or 2 of when we started doing the previews. We've done
our horse betting show.
We've done probably around 100 recaps, and Brad Tavares has been mentioned on every single one for who should name of middleweight fight next. Yeah. The answer all along was apparently Bruno Silva. That is who should fight Brad Tavares next. Here, let me ask you a question. Brad Tavares is 14-7 in the UFC. He's got 21 fights in the UFC. He is now the most successful, I would say, member of Tough 11. Like, he lost in the final to Court McGee, but at this point, he's outstripped McGee's accomplishment. I mean, he's been
pretty close. Yeah, but yeah,
it's probably. But I mean, Tavares is still a top 15 middleweight, and he's been top 10 or top 15 for 10 years now.
It's a much better win right now than if you beat Court McGee.
For sure.
Yeah.
What is Brad Tavares good at? Like, if we're doing one of those 2003 style, like those 3 bullet points under his name as he walks out to the octagon, tell me what Brad Tavares is good at.
Well, wait, what is he elite at? Nothing.
No, that's not what I. That's why I asked it the way I did.
Yeah, he's not elite at anything. But it's like. I understand what you're gonna say, but then I flip that and say, what is he bad at? I would say he's technical striker. I think he. I think he's pretty technically sound. I think he's got strong takedown defense. He's a hard guy to take down, and so that's 2. I'm trying. I mean, there's a lot of things that I'm trying to find like 3 of the best ones. So they're pretty technically sound. Technically sound outside kickboxing would be like the one bullet point. Like a strong defensive wrestler, and I'm gonna say he's got good calf kicks.
Oh, cool.
There you go. That's my breakdown. I'm not gonna break down anymore. Like, it gets to me, I'm not gonna go through all these points like I just did, Brad.
I'll copy and paste that like every time we preview a Brad Tavares fight from now on out. And I was gonna like just have that lead into what you thought about the fight.
Okay, so I just gave you like I could give you like 10 more points about Brad Tavares, but I'm not gonna. I'm just gonna go to Bruno Silva now. The one more thing I'll say about Brad Tavares though is something that surprised me in this last fight, and I'm kind of hoping it was just he was off for a little while, returned. He was really gun shy against Dricus du Plessis. I think he lost simply just didn't match his volume. Like du Plessis didn't a guy who's possibly fighting for the title next. Like makes the most sense. Now that it's Alex Bahez is definitely moving up to middleweight. Like the fight was there for him. He just didn't match his output, which is surprising that he just didn't. It seemed like he was no urgency in that fight. Now, Bruno Silva, I don't know about Silva. He looked terrible against Gerald Meerschaert. He looked flat. He gassed early. He looked sloppy. I mean, he's a guy he could constantly move. He looked smaller, like thinner, like less muscle. He can fight on both stances. He's always had really big power. He's always been a guy who throws a lot of looping punches, but he was throwing them ugly, slow looping punches at Gerald Meerschaert. I mean, he was overextending on his shots. He was almost knocking himself. Almost like he looked like a hockey player throwing punches at the other hockey player, but not grabbing the jersey. Like, you know what I mean? Like not having that stable, like a jersey to help me, hold up. You know when like a hockey player lands that big punch and they both fall down? Like that's kind of what it seemed like. Now his best is when he like sits back, slows it down, slows the pace down, and then just darts in the pocket and throws wild bombs. But he gets tagged because he leaves himself open. He throws from his hips. I mean, go back to the guys that he's clearly way better than. Like Jordan Wright was having success catching him with some shots. Like that's not a guy that should be landing pretty good on you. Now he'll throw some flying knees, and going back in the day when he took on Alexander Smenko, he had a good strong clinch, landed some good punches in the clinch, but he's a weak defensive wrestler too. Like Wellington Turman took him down, Andrew Sanchez took him down, Gerald Meerschaert took him down. He struggles to get back up. Now he's a BJJ black belt, but he has 0 submissions on his career, so that's not something you can get excited about. This is a tough fight because both guys look so bad in that last fight. I'm gonna go with Tavares. He looked like a guy that had a bad fight, while Silva looks like a guy that might be shot. Like one of these, like, wow, like a guy that looked really good to suddenly like, wow, he's done. Tavares has the cardio advantage too. I think he works the distance until Silva, Silva's trying to press the action, throwing big haymakers, maybe tries to get a takedown or two, but I think Silva eventually gasses out. And I think Tavares turns it. Hopefully, Tavares shows that he still has something left, turns it up, and I'll say it's going to be like similar to Marshall. Now, Marshall won by submission, but I think it's going to be like a late stoppage. I'll say Tavares wins by TKO.
Yeah, I agree with your breakdown here. Anytime, and this, if you're a regular of our previews, you've heard me say this before, when a fighter comes to the UFC from certain parts of the world and they look like an action figure and their game runs on shocking speed and power, I do want to see them fight in the UFC for a bit before we settle into how they're going to be at this level. Silva had a pretty obvious physical decline, ahead of the Meerschaert fight. There are reasons that might be. I'll leave it at that. But yeah, like he physically just did not seem to be the same fighter. At his best, when he showed up and just knocked out Turman, knocked out Sanchez, knocked out Wright, I mean, he presented as a Muay Thai kickboxer, but not with a game that would have actually shown him a lot of success competing in kickboxing. It was very bread and butter kickboxing for MMA. The comparison I would come up with is Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira is one of the greatest grapplers in MMA history, but did it all with just basic guillotines, rear naked chokes, and arm bars. You never saw, a no-gi Ezekiel choke out of the guy or, an intricate leg lock game. He just had a couple basic building blocks, and on MMA fighters, it was enough to let them succeed against the best of the best for a long, long time. Like, that's the kind of kickboxing game that, like, a good MMA kickboxer will often bring. You're not going to see the subtleties. You're not going to see question mark kicks out of them. They're just, a basic repertoire of strikes that they make work because they have speed, power, and aggression. Silva didn't show speed, power, or aggression against Meerschaert. That's a problem. And I agree with you. Neither guy looked great in their last outing, but outside of that last outing, Tavares is one of the most consistent fighters. I mean, really one of the most consistent fighters in UFC history. He's a guy that if this were baseball, you'd be like, oh man, he's going to get 3,000 hits before this is all done, isn't he? Yeah. He never made an all-star game, but he's going to have 3,000 hits. He's going to have 300 home runs. Yeah, that's Brad Tavares. Like, first ballot Hall of Very Good in the UFC. And at 35, again, aside from the Duplessis fight, seemed to be fighting about as well as he ever had. Antonio Carlos Jr. and Omari Akhmedov were both decent quality wins. I like Tavares to win this fight. I honestly think he can strike with Silva just fine. And he has the ability to wrestle if he wants to. We saw Silva try it against Alex Pereira and with mixed results at best. The question for me is whether he gets the finish. If Silva is as gassed out early and is not very game as he was against Meerschaert, I think Tavares could absolutely get a late stoppage. And I'm with you. I'm leaning that way. Give me Tavares by third round TKO and, should have the fight well in hand by then. That brings us to the co-main event of UFC Fight Night 222. It is a high-stakes bantamweight matchup between Song Yadong and Ricky Simon. Song, the 25-year-old from China, is 19-7-1 with one no contest overall. He is 8-2-1 in the UFC. He is coming off a loss. He got stopped in between rounds in the headliner of UFC Fight Night 210 last September by Corey Sandhagen. That snapped a 3-fight win streak for him over Casey Kenny, Julio Arce, and Marlon Moraes. Song will look to get back in the win column, look to reestablish himself as a potential title contender in this division against Simon, who is looking to do the same while he continues to extend his impressive winning streak. The 30-year-old Washington State native is 20-3 overall. He is 8-2 since coming to the UFC as an alum of the first season of Dana White's Contender Series, though he was not signed. Wasn't signed immediately because that was the first season and really only one fighter per episode got signed. And after Mike Slow Rodriguez had his moments in the sun, there just wasn't any room for a second signee. However, he did make it to the UFC a bit later, and he is 8-2 ever since. very famously had the controversial last-second finish over Merab Dvalishvili, but he is on a 5-fight win streak right now. Since his loss to Rob Font all the way back 3 years ago, he has beaten Ray Borg, Gaetano Perello, Brian Kelleher, Rafael Asuncao, and most recently, Jack Shore, whom he handed his first loss at UFC on ABC, Ortega versus Rodriguez last July. So he will look to cap that off with another top 10 win in the form of Song. Keith, I'm going to hand this one off to you. First, I'm going to ask you to guess who the favorite is.
I'm going to guess that this is a trick question. That's a pick 'em.
I would not do that to you. One person is a favorite. Okay, here I'll the favorite is minus 140. The underdog is plus 110. Who are they?
Oh man, I have no idea because I could. Both guys are really good. Oh man, I'm gonna say, man, I don't know. Yadong is good. Simone's good. I'll go Simone. I'll say Simone's a favorite.
You are correct. Simone is the minus 140 favorite. Song plus 110 on the comeback. You just made it.
I think
you demonstrated for us how close this fight feels. Tell me how you see it playing out.
Yeah, this is an absolute fantastic fight, especially the X's and O's. I really like both guys. I'm not saying that either guy will be a champion one day, but if I don't know where our rankings are right now, but if either of these guys beat I don't know who our fifth ranked guy is. If these guys beat them, I wouldn't be surprised. Like that's how good I think these guys are. Yadong is really well rounded. He's a very poised striker with some high output, technically sound. He's a boxer.
Real quick, our fifth ranked guy right now is TJ Dillashaw. I would absolutely take either of them over him right now.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. He's fast hands. He's very accurate. Very short shots, not a lot of tells. Nice snap. Works behind a crisp jab. Attacks with the combos. He is a little bit of a headhunter, which I don't like. But that's about it. Striking. He's really like coming into his power. I mean, he's showing off his power recently. He's got some fast kicks, fast high kick, hard calf kick. He can sneak in a takedown. Not the greatest defensive wrestler, but he's a good overall grappler. He's got 3 submission wins, strong get-up game. He looked really good against like Casey Kenya, a guy who's a wrestler. He's got good cardio. He had a war against Marlon Vera, and he didn't slow down at all in that fight. Now, again, that was up a weight, and it was 145 because I think some weird things happened. I forgot what the situation was, but still, he's there's not a lot of glaring weaknesses when he comes in. Now, Ricky Simone is obviously your classic wrestle boxer, very good athlete, very physically strong. I mean, he's a brute, quick hands. He gets in the pocket and he unloads good shots. He gets there with a lot of feints, feinting up and down, faking his shots. It's been a while now, but to go back to like the Ray Borg fight, he was freezing Ray Borg with feints. It's good output, attacks with combinations, goes to the body and to the head, and he will eat some shots due to his lack of head movement. But he's got a chin and he can get in the pocket, he can brawl, and he showed against Jack Shaw. Like he's starting to really get some power, and I think that also comes with just he's gaining confidence in his hands. And he's got some thudding leg kicks, and he checks leg kicks himself, which is rare. He's a very good wrestler. Good entries. I love his reaction double against Jack Shaw. Showed the difference between his wrestling and a guy like Shaw, who's a very good wrestler himself. Strong top game. I love that he's committed to the takedown. Like when he gets you down, you work your way up. He is staying glued on you, making you carry his weight, making you work. He uses every ounce of energy to get back up to your feet. He's not much of a submission threat, but he's one of those wrestlers. He looks for like the head and arm triangle choke. I think this is a fantastic fight. My notes makes me want to go pick Yadong. I mean, he's so fast on the feet. He hits so hard. He's looking better and better every fight. I talk about Ricky Simone's confidence. Like Yadong's confidence is growing. I can't imagine Ricky Simone. He's so smart. I can't imagine him wanting to test himself on the feet with Yadong. I can't imagine him just not wanting to close a distance immediately and just turn this into a 15-minute wrestling match, which he can do. I'm really torn in this one, but I'm going to go with Simone. The one thing Yadong hasn't shown me an ability to do is stop takedowns from a high-level wrestler. And so I'm going to go with Simone. Give me Simone by decision.
I'm glad that this one is as hard to pick for you as it is for me. I look at the people that have really given Simone a lot of trouble at the UFC level. I mean, the Uriah Faber fight, he got caught in like 40 seconds and they fight 10 times. That might be the only time that version of Faber beat Simone.
Absolutely.
He should have lost to Merab Dvalishvili, but Dvalishvili might be the only person in the division that I'm dead sure is a better wrestler than Simone. And it was much earlier in both guys' careers. That really leaves the Rob Font fight. Like if there is a blueprint for beating Ricky Simone right now, it's what Font did. And I think that might have been the best performance of Font's career. And I don't know if he could do it again now. Like he got up when Simone took him down early.
Yeah.
He avoided takedowns late. He used footwork to stay at his preferred range and jabbed Simone up for 3 rounds. It was a great performance by Rob Font.
Yeah. Giannis might be his best performance now, though.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I wiped that out of my mind because Giannis is my guy. But that was the fight.
A long time ago too.
Yeah, but that's the fight that placed Rob Font in my mind as okay. Rob Font's a top 10 bantamweight. He's a future title contender, and he kept rolling from there. That of all the things that we've seen Ricky Simone struggle with at the UFC level, that's the one that Song might be able to come closest to. But trying to jab Simone up at range runs contrary to how Song likes to fight. Now, if he can be that successful in fighting off the takedowns, getting back up, making Simone work, I mean, that opens up all kind of possibilities to him. Or if Simone just decides to bite down and swing with them, he might get caught like he did against Faber. But yeah, like I think the matchup here does slightly favor Simone if he fights to his best advantage. And yeah, you love to see it happen. You know, like I like wrestle boxers as much as you do. It's kind of ironic that he lost to Uriah Faber because he's like a perfect cookie cutter example of the type of wrestle boxer that Team Alpha Male basically foisted onto MMA. But I like Simone here to win a decision over Song in a really, really fun fight. Might be one of the type of fights where on the recap, we're saying that neither guy's stock really took a hit here because both guys, made the right decisions, foster their best potential, and just Simone happened to come out on the winning end. But yeah, give me Simone to win by decision and probably to be in the title picture in this division, maybe by the end of the year. And if it comes down to him and Merab, there's already some history there. It'll be an easy one to sell. With that, we come to the main event of UFC Fight Night 222, a heavyweight clash between Sergey Pavlovich and Curtis Blaydes. Pavlovich, the 30-year-old Russian, is 17-1 in his mixed martial arts career. He is 5-1 in the UFC. He made his debut in November of 2018 as an undefeated prospect coming out of Fight Nights Global, and he got pounded out late in the first round by Alistair Overeem. Since then, he has bounced back with 5 straight wins, all by KO or TKO, all in the first round, over increasingly stern opposition in the form of Marcelo Golm, Maurice Green, Shamil Abdurakhimov, Derek Lewis, and Tai Tuivasa. The most recent of those, the Tuivasa win, was at UFC on ESPN Thompson versus Holland in December. He will look to make it 6 straight, perhaps cement himself as a title challenger later this year. And opposing him in that pursuit will be Blaydes. The 32-year-old Chicago native is 17-3 with 1 no contest overall. He is 12-3 with 1 no contest in the UFC. Worth noting, if you're keeping track at home, that 1 no contest was an easy win over Adam Milstead that was overturned when Blaydes tested positive for cannabis. So if you think cannabis is overstated as a performance-enhancing drug for anything other than eating chips, he should be 13-3. He is on a 3-fight win streak since his shocking knockout loss to Lewis basically 2 years ago. He has a dominant decision win over Jairzinho Rosenstrike, a second-round TKO of Christos, and most recently, in the main event of UFC London 2 last year, a 15-second nothing win over Tom Aspinall, where Aspinall's knee gave out on him in a non-contact situation just 15 seconds into the fight. Nonetheless, Blaydes survives and advances and meets Pavlovich. Keith, the favorite in this fight is -165. The underdog is +140. Match the fighter with the line.
Blaydes is the favorite.
You are correct. Blaydes is -165. Pavlovich +140. If I were doing the Joe Rogan, if you built a fighter in a lab to beat Sergey Pavlovich thing, the way he lost to Overeem is absolutely something that Curtis Blaydes can do. In fact, it is what Curtis Blaydes does better than anybody else in the UFC right now, and perhaps better than anybody else in the history of the UFC. In terms of, this is my game, you stop it. I mean, his striking has developed some over the years he's been in the UFC, but it is still very rudimentary, and it is still a means to an end. He is one of the epitomes in the modern UFC. I mean, we talked about Yahya earlier this card. He is a guy that knows where his bread is buttered. He wants to get the fight to the ground as early as possible and set up shop from there. He's helped in that regard by being a very good wrestler. I mean, he's a former junior college national champ. He's a former NAIA All-American, but with a kind of wrestling game that translates well to heavyweight MMA. Yeah. He is very athletic. He is very spry on his feet for a 6'4", 255-pound guy. He's absolutely huge. And I say this every time we preview one of his fights. He doesn't look like a heavyweight from a distance. Like, the way he's built, he's not like barrel chested. He's got kind of like long arms and legs. I mean, he's an absolutely huge guy, but sometimes you don't realize it until you see him standing next to another heavyweight, and you're like, "Oh, you are Titanic." But yeah, nonetheless,
he's a big dude.
He has, if not the best blast double in heavyweight MMA history, it's up there with Brock Lesnar and Cain Velasquez. Okay. Yeah, Lesnar and Velasquez and Blaydes. Like, Lesnar for the pure power, and Randleman in a very different era.
Yeah. But yeah.
Randleman should have had the greatest blast double in light heavyweight history, or maybe middleweight. But instead, he's in the discussion for heavyweight. But yeah, I mean, Lesnar for the pure power, Velasquez for the fantastic finishing ability where he landed in side control most of the time. Blaydes has got a little of all of that.
And he's big. He's much bigger than Cain Velasquez.
He is much bigger than Cain Velasquez. And while he doesn't have the raw bulk of Lesnar, his height, he's taller than Lesnar, and his wingspan is just as big. He's a huge dude who moves like not many other fighters. He is a bruiser from on top. At times, Blaydes is willing to just kind of set up shop on top and do enough work not to get stood back up. But when he decides to turn on the jets, it is hideous to observe. I mean, his win over Overeem, he was a couple minutes away from a pretty ho-hum 30-27 decision where all of a sudden it just turned into a bloodbath because he turned up the aggression, started throwing, actually postured up and started throwing elbows, and Overeem was hamburger in seconds. And that was pretty early in his UFC run. He's capable of that at any time, but at worst, Blaydes is a guy that if you can't do something about it, he's gonna win every round against you by taking you down within the first 30 seconds of each round and doing enough work not to get stood back up. He has good like good mat returns that don't waste his energy. He doesn't do the Alexander Romanov, oh, if you stand up, I'm going to take out my frustration on you by suplexing you back down. Nope. He's just going to drag you back and do an inside or outside trip over your back leg and put you right back where you were. And you're still burning more energy than him. He has been hurt on the feet, obviously. He has 3 UFC losses. 2 are to Francis Ngannou. And especially in the second one, Ngannou just, hit him with one punch perfectly, just right behind the ear, dropped him like a sack of potatoes. He was well on his way to winning 3 rounds against Derek Lewis, who is historically one of the best fighters in UFC history, getting back up. But Lewis submarined him with a perfect intercepting punch and ended that fight. That's it. Otherwise, Blaydes has won 13 fights in the UFC. This is such an interesting test because on pure wrestling, Blaydes should probably kind of ragdoll Pavlovich. But Pavlovich is one of the few guys in the division that's going to be almost as big as him or about as big and equally nimble. Like Pavlovich is another guy who's shockingly light on his feet and spry for a 6'3", 6'4", 250-pound guy. I'm leaning Blaydes here, but long way around to saying that if there is another guy in this division right now that could do the Lewis thing, get back up, or at least survive the round the first time he's taken down, time him with a knee or an uppercut on the way in on a takedown, hurt him big and put him down, or do the Ngannou thing and just, sidestep, not be there when he gets there, or have the physical strength to like stand him up and shuck him off at least once and then start hurting him. It might be Pavlovich. So if Blaydes loses here by one of those ways, then I think we might finally see his ceiling, because I've thought for a couple of years now that it's hard to say so-and-so is the best heavyweight because so much of it is dependent on matchup and style. But against a lot of guys in the division, he's the best heavyweight. Like there are plenty of guys in the division that I would give less chance of beating Blaydes than beating Francis Ngannou, for example, just because of what Blaydes did to him.
I agree.
But if Blaydes and Ngannou fight again, I got Ngannou all day. It's just a style thing. So I'm interested to see that because we're going to learn something about Curtis Blaydes, and we're definitely going to learn something about Pavlovich as well. And at age 32 and 30, respectively, there's a good chance this is not the last time we see these guys fight. If the winner of this fight ends up winning a UFC title, these guys are absolutely fighting again at some point. Unless this fight is such a blowout that nobody wants to see it. But I don't see that. Even if Pavlovich does to Blaydes like Lewis did, like lose the first round and then knock him out in the second, that's not going to stop him from doing a rematch if one of them's got a title a year or two from now. Give me Blaydes by decision here. And even though I think these are 2 of the 5 best heavyweights in the world, I think it might look a little one-sided. I think Blaydes is going to get takedowns. And the thing is, if Pavlovich doesn't find that one punch, then all we're going to see is him winning 5 straight rounds against Pavlovich.
Yeah.
Even if there was a percentage chance every round that the Blaydes loses spectacularly, if it doesn't happen, then all history sees without watching the fight is, 50-45 Blaydes. Sure. Give me 50-45 Blaydes or 49-46. That's my main chance, my most likely outcome. My second most likely outcome is Pavlovich absolutely starching him in the first 2 rounds. Yeah. And that's it. Like what would really surprise me is if they go 5 rounds and Blaydes just really has a hard time getting Pavlovich down and it ends up being conducted mostly on the feet or in the clinch. That would be weird. For Blaydes, for somebody who has as many takedowns as him and wants it on the ground as much as he does, spends very little time in the clinch. But yeah, give me Blaydes over Pavlovich by wrestlefuckery. And if I'm wrong, may I at least please be wrong in the expected way.
I totally agree. Like, before I do a long breakdown, the short breakdown is either Blaydes out wrestles him until he either gets a stoppage or just out wrestles him for 25 minutes, or Pavlovich catches him, starches him out early. Okay. That is the easy breakdown. The hard part is picking which one that's going to be, because it's obviously two super extremes, It's funny you talk about Blaydes, and we always talk about like his build and his physique is so different. What is his history with like football? Like, I know he didn't.
How is he not a tight end in the NFL right now?
See, I was thinking D end.
Oh yeah, an edge rusher. Like the guy they just bring in on passing downs. Because he's like 6'4", 255.
Moved fast, big, got long arms, and quick first step. Like really blast through doubles. Like I could see him playing. I could see him pass rush. I could see him being defensive tackle. I mean, if he had a little bit more size, it's just like looks like a Bruce Smith. Yeah. Just, I just. One of those, if you pick the wrong spot, I guess, or something. He's a massive dude. It's so funny that he's so much younger than you think he would be. And his stand-up, like we always talk about his wrestling, his stand-up has come a long way. Mm-hmm. Like we don't mention that like he starts Christos with these. He obviously has some big power. Now, my notes, just for the record, is going to be the same exact notes I said his last fight because he fought 15 seconds. So, what was I going to learn in those 15 seconds? Some of this happens because he lands shots at the end of his punches because he has those long, weird arms where his reach is much different than people expect. His straight right is a good punch. He uses feints well. He's shoulder rolling, which I think is extremely dangerous in heavy MMA. You could just tell because of that he's spending a lot of time boxing. He throws some hard kicks, especially to the legs. And you mentioned he's one of the best wrestlers in the division. He's the best heavyweight wrestler in the division. He's one of the best wrestlers just in general, regardless of division. He shoots penetration shots and turns corner. It's just a rare thing to see in heavyweight MMA. He can blast right through your hips. We talked about his fight against Volkov, or big guy, solid grappler, and just how he was on the canvas for that fight the entire time. You take a big guy like Shamil Abdurakhimov, same thing. And one thing about Curtis Blaydes, why he's such a successful wrestler, he doesn't care about being exciting. He understands that half my money is winning. So we have guys who are even better wrestlers, but they want to learn to wrestle, the striking, and they want to strike more. And that's not him. His striking is like, he strikes to either get a takedown or it's like, emergency plan. At the end of the day, he still knows, get on top. Why am I going to take a chance where it's 50-50 throwing punches at each other, or I'm on top and it's 99 me throwing down on you, and I give the 1% because guys can sometimes they land some hammer fists and some elbows and bottom, but most likely, it's Blaydes dropping elbows and punches on him. He slowly works to get to a better position. He's definitely one of these guys that's more about control first. Once he tires his opponents out, as you mentioned, like taking them mat returns, that's when he unloads with ground and pound. And he has good, hard ground and pound. We saw that, how he just wore Volkov out and beat him up. But the thing about Curtis Blaydes is got to be that chin. I mean, Derek Lewis, Francis Ngannou, both starts. But we've said this sometimes, those are the two best knockout artists in the history of the UFC and maybe the history of MMA. Who hits harder than those two guys? Nobody.
You take everyone who's ever fought in mixed martial arts, anywhere, any weight class. Who are the two I would least like to have a straight free punch from? Those are number one and number two right there.
Yeah, that might be somewhere we're forgetting. I mean, Mark Hunt might be one. But I'd at least throw him in the cat. But the point is like we talk about Curtis Blaydes getting knocked out, but he got knocked out by like this wasn't. Even if a guy like Volkov never hurt or never did, like, and Volkov can crack. No, it was.
the two. Rosenstrike. Rosenstrike had 3 rounds.
Rosenstrike, yeah, that's another good one. Like Rosenstrike can crack.
Yeah,
but yeah. So Sergey Pavlovich, one of the better guys in the division when it comes to athleticism. He moves well. He's got some quick hands. He's technical, for a heavyweight. So I just want to say, like, I'm not comparing a skill set to like a Brandon Moran. Obviously, it's much different. But for a heavyweight, he's technical, very accurate, straight punches. His right hand, his straight right is deadly. His left hook is legendary. Earth-shattering power. I mean, he's got 5 straight first-round knockouts in the UFC. In the top MMA organization in the world, he's got 5 straight first-round knockouts.
Including top 10 guys.
Against some top 10 guys. And then he's like a Russian Francis Ngannou. He's the white Russian Francis Ngannou, like where he's just going out there and just lapping dudes. He's got a great chin. And we saw that in his last fight against Tai Tuivasa, where Tai Tuivasa, I mean, we all remember, him putting Tuivasa out, but Tuivasa landed some good shots in those exchanges, and he didn't even flinch, like didn't even seem bothered. The one thing, he doesn't throw kicks often, and he doesn't check leg kicks, and he hasn't offensively wrestled in the UFC. We saw very little glimpses of it in Fight Night Global. And the one time we seen him get out wrestled in the UFC was that first fight in the UFC against Alistair Overeem. But again, it's your first fight in the UFC, which is already a big step up in competition, big nervous, and then you got Alistair Overeem. He won a legendary heavyweight, a top 10 probably heavyweight ever, top 15, something like that. But also a historically underrated. We talked about like. I truly believe that Alistair he's not a striker. He's a wrestler. He's a better wrestler than he is a striker. Obviously, I know he's got the credentials, so I know
he's got the credentials. Yeah, but
he has all the credentials of anybody who's ever struck. And I get it.
But in MMA,
he's a wrestler, and he's fantastic at it. And then obviously Pavlovich. I don't want to go too much of rant. Pavlovich is a submission. We talked about the most likely thing being Blaydes either wrestles him to a victory or Pavlovich lands a big shot. What's funny is we see the route, but also we've seen these guys lose, and we said, okay, Derek Lewis and Francis Ngannou are the 2 guys that have caught Blaydes and put him out. Yeah, you know who else could do that? Sergey Pavlovich. Like, he's in that category.
Yes.
Okay. Well, how do we see Sergey Pavlovich lose? Getting taken down and get out wrestled and beat up on the ground by Alistair Overeem. Yeah. You know who can do that? Curtis Blaydes. He's in that category. Like, we talk about how great the ground game of Alistair Overeem, and Curtis Blaydes, same thing. He's fantastic. I would say the smart pick is Curtis Blaydes. If we say what's most likely to happen of those two, if you gave me an option to pick between those two, yeah, I mean, it just this is a cop out, but just the history of the sport, the wrestler dictates where the fight is, he should be able to get the fight to the ground. Plus, it's not out of the realm of possibility that he lands a big shot himself. I mean, I think his striking really gets overshadowed by wrestling. I think he's a much better striker than people give him credit. And obviously, because of his size, he can hit you and put you out. So that's not – if Pavlovich is so worried about stopping the takedown, he's dropping his hands. I could see, a feint overhand or like a looping that Kevin Redelman diving left hook to Crow Cop where you're expecting the shot coming in, your hands dropping down because of that, and it's a left hook. So that's like another victory. Like I'm not betting that. So like if we have tiers of most likely, the top 2 is Blaydes wrestling and Pavlovich, and then like tiers down is Blaydes catching them and knocking them out. I just want to say that's still another option. Mm-hmm. However, I'm going the other way, man. I'm going to go like it looks like the Ngannou fights, where he just comes out, he gets throwing big shots, and I'm going to say, Pavlovich comes out of the gate and he catches Blaydes. I say he's going to put him out. So I'm going to say the first round streak comes, and we talk about, John Jones fighting Stipe Miocic, and that's the huge fight. Oh my God, the greatest UFC heavyweight champion of all time versus the greatest fighter of all time, and Madison Square Garden, and a big one, but all the side talks would be like, yeah, but who wants to fight Sergey Pavlovich? That's the boogeyman coming in, and we're not talking about Francis Ngannou anymore against John Jones. It's Sergey Pavlovich. So I'm going to say Pavlovich does it. I'm going to say he knocks out Blaydes in the very first round.
You know what? We're going to have plenty to talk about on the recap because, we both picked opposite sides of what we agree is the most likely coin here.
The UFC is rooting for my pick. I can tell you that.
Oh, yes, because
that's for sure.
Curtis Blaydes is a terrible matchup for John Jones because the one thing that John Jones doesn't do beautifully is one-punch knockouts. So considering that's really the only way Blaydes has lost is somebody hit him with a single strike hard enough to end the night. Yeah, that sounds miserable.
But on the flip side, John Jones has not faced a high-level guy who might be a better wrestler than him since ever.
I don't think he's ever faced a better wrestler than him. He might. No. He's one of the best wrestlers in MMA history.
Who? No, he doesn't have the credit. I know he's a high school state champion and all that. And I don't know if
the closest would be Bader.
I don't know if that was a true. Yeah, Bader. Yeah, Bader on paper is a better wrestler.
Yeah,
than John Jones. But yeah,
and Jones effortlessly guillotined him.
Yeah.
We will have plenty of what if fantasy type heavyweight matchups to talk about after this main event. All we're doing here is hoping that it does not end in a freakish injury or weird foul, but let us actually have these behemoths clash and learn something about this division. Any more thoughts on this one before we wrap up?
It's a fun one. I'm looking forward, depending how it goes for the recap. It should be a fun one.
Seriously. This has been the Sherdog Radio Network preview for UFC Fight Night 222, Pavlovich versus Blaydes, also known as UFC Vegas 71. I've been Ben Duffy. He has been Keith Schillen. If this is your first time listening to one of our previews, first of all, thank you. We hope you enjoyed it. We do our best to bring a mix of actual deep analysis, predictions, and the occasional side story and humorous, irrelevant reference. Please do like, subscribe, leave us a comment. Keith and I both man the comment section. We would love to hear your take on these fights. If you think any of our picks are way off in left field, if you want to get in with Keith on what would be probably the biggest upset in the UFC this year if it happens, get in there and let us know, and I will praise you to the rafters as well if it plays out. But most importantly, join us for the recap. Keith and I are live on the Sherdog YouTube page, usually about 15 minutes after the main event, while the post-fight pressers and everything are still going on. We break down all of these fights from the top to the bottom. Keith takes the captain's chair, and we talk about what was good, what was bad, what was surprising, what was controversial. There's always something, and the live chat is open that entire time. So we are taking your questions, your comments, and your hot takes in real time. We have a growing community of friends that hang out with us after the fights, and we would love for you to join them. Between now and then, thank you once again for listening. Enjoy the rest of your week, and by all means, enjoy the fights.